Hi everyone, we'll start in 10 minutes once the other people also join.
वो भी धूप ने तो
I I I
काय म्हणू
Good evening, Divan sir. You can start the recording and sharp 8:05 we can we can start.
Recording is started, ma'am. By 8:05, I shall also start the session, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And welcome everyone.
hello Devansh sir. Hello HJ Academy.
Hi, Indriani, ma'am. Pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Same here. Please call me Indrayani. No,
Sure.
ma'am and all.
Definitely. Okay. Okay. Hi, team. I think we can start now. Can someone confirm that I'm audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
audible. Yes,
You
yes.
are audible.
Thank you so much. So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Devansh Goyal, and I am an instructor of the Certified Information Systems Auditors examination at the Himangdoshi Academy. So, uh, let's take 5 minutes and go through the curriculum of the examination and what you can expect from us and how the sessions will go ahead from today. Okay, so just give me a thumbs up that my screen is visible to all of you. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So today's the first session for the CISA examination. Now, I would like to give you an overview of the examination first. So this examination has 150 questions and it is a 4-hour examination. It is, a computer-based examination, which you can take at remote proctoring, or you can even take at the designated centers by ISACA. The syllabus or curriculum for the CISA examination spreads around 5 domains, wherein throughout the 5 domains, we take an understanding of the auditing process, what auditing is, what is information systems auditing, what are the different concepts in relation to information security, what are the different kinds of information assets, business operations, what is our role as an auditor, what is the role of management, what is the governance framework that spreads across the organization for sound security management. So we have 5 domains. Each domain has its own respective weightage for the examination. The domain that we'll be starting today is the first domain, which comprises roughly 18% of the weightage in the examination. It is the title of this domain is Information Systems Auditing Process. So just to give you an understanding, when we actually appear for the examination, we get a jumbled question bank. So it is 150 questions, but it is not easy for us to figure out which question is from which domain, because in examination, questions are not segregated domain wise. You just get random 150 questions, and sometimes they relate to one domain, sometimes they relate to multiple domains. So we need a holistic understanding of all the 5 domains, and we cannot leave even one single domain for the examination. Domain number 1 is the most simple domain, and it tells us about the basics of auditing, the basics of information systems auditing, what is audit, how we do an audit, and what are the different parameters and nuances in relation to the auditing as a profession. I would like to give a brief introduction about myself. So my name is Devansh Goyal. I am from India. By profession, I am a chartered accountant, a US certified public accountant. I am a certified information systems auditor. I am certified SAP consulting across varied areas such as financial accounting, procurement, generative AI, and cloud. I am certified in cybersecurity from ISC Square. I'm certified GDPR lead implementer and also ISO 27001 lead auditor and lead implementer. I have a work experience of more than 8 years, and I've worked in multiple areas, specifically in relation to cybersecurity and information systems, such as IT audits, security audits, penetration testing of applications, ERP migrations, full-fledged ERP rollouts, cybersecurity audits, ERP audits, and ISO 27001 implementation and auditing assignments. So my work experience varies. I have worked for multiple industries. I've worked for multiple clients associated with different sectors and different industries. So I will try to give certain insights from my practical experience as well, as and when we'll go through this particular course. So before we start deep into the concept, I would just like to give you an understanding as to how the sessions would go from today. So every session, you know that it's going to be for 3 hours. It would be on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right? The timings must be informed to you, keeping in mind the different time zones from which people are joining us. Throughout the session of 3 hours, we shall be covering the topics, and then we shall have 2 rounds of question and answer. The first round of questioning would be when before the break, which is after 1.5 hours, when the session is done. And the second break and the second round of question and answers would be towards the end of the session. So this would give all the participants an open window to ask any kind of questions they have, and relating to the course, relating to what they have started. Apart from that, every day we'll try to solve at least 5 to 6, 5 to 10 questions that are highly examination oriented and very similar to what you can actually see in the examination. So every day towards the end of the session, we shall also be having a question and answer round wherein we'll try to solve at least 5 questions, but we'll try if we can solve more than 5 or maybe close to 10. So let's talk about the core concept. So the Certified Information Systems Auditors, domain number 1, the title is Comprehensive Overview of Information Systems Auditing. Now, herein we talk about the key concepts relating to auditing as a profession, the auditing standards, what are the practices that are associated with IS auditing. Now, let's understand about the basics of auditing. So, what is information systems auditing? Or for the fact, what is an auditing? See, I believe that some of us must be coming from a financial background, or maybe some of us must be having an understanding of what audit is. But auditing is nothing but you are evaluating something, you are examining something, you are checking something. So, whenever I am talking of any particular process, auditing is nothing but you are testing or examining the process. Now, from the viewpoint of information systems, it is testing or examination of information systems. Now, what do I mean by information systems? See, information systems does not only mean your technology or technological assets, right? So information systems does not just mean servers or laptops or softwares. Information systems is a very broad term that encompasses the entire process. It encompasses not only the information assets that are associated with it, but it also includes the entire process that is involved in end-to-end management of those information systems and IT assets. Okay, so your job as an auditor is not just to understand what assets or what technology is there, but your job is to understand and assess the entire end-to-end process, right? Uh, of which that particular information asset is a part of. So if I'm talking of any simple process such as access right management, then your job is not just to check the application that is getting used for granting access or revoking systems access, but your job is to do a formal testing or examination of the entire process. How the entire process starts, what are the people involved in it, what is the technology involved in it, what is the ultimate outcome of it. So with the passage of time, we shall see how the actual auditing is taken care of from a process level perspective. Also, in today's time, when I'm talking about evaluation, examination, or auditing any process or any system per se, we need to take into mind that we are not just checking the process or systems. We have to have a risk focused approach, right? So nowhere it is mentioned in this definition that we as auditors need to have a risk focused approach. But when you'll solve the questions for the examination, and when you'll actually see in practical scenario how an audit happens, we are not just merely checking the systems. We as auditors have a risk focused lens. We evaluate things from a risk perspective, right? And with the passage of time, as we'll go ahead, we'll try to understand how actually an audit is done from a risk perspective. So coming to the bookish definition or the definition as per your CRM, Information systems auditing is nothing but it is a formal testing. You know what is formal? Formal means a systematic, right? It means something that is governed by a presence of a formal documentation. So you must have seen that in whatever companies you guys must be working in. Every process has an SOP or standard operating procedure associated with it. Every process or system comes with a manual which tells you how that thing should work, right? So whenever we talk of auditing, it is a formal testing, right? Where which is backed by certain formal documentation. So it is a formal testing or examination of systems to determine whether, first thing, information systems follow applicable laws, regulations, etc. Second, information systems should comply with the governance criteria and related policies and procedures and also align with the strategic objectives. And information and data within the IS systems should have acceptable levels of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So obviously, whenever we are doing an audit, our focus should also be, all these three pointers. First one is that there should be a compliance to laws and regulations. Now, you know that if I am talking from a systems perspective, we have sensitive customer data involved in it, right? And we have data privacy standards too, such as GDPR when it comes to Europe, or such as in India, we have the Digital Data Protection Act, which we also refer to as the DPDP Act. Okay, so and income, and if we talk about data privacy regulations, they simply say that, like for example, data should not be retained for more than a certain specific period of time, right? And you have multiple other regulations as well. So our job is to take into consideration what kind of laws and regulations are applicable from an IT perspective onto the client we are working for, and the systems, the process is in compliance to that. Second, Second, whatever systems or processes we have, they should comply with the governance criteria. Now, what is governance? We'll study later on, but I'll just give you a basic understanding. See, governance is nothing but the direction the top management sets for the company. Every company has managing directors, board of directors, different committee of the board of directors, and they set up certain governance criteria. They set up certain direction, certain end target for the company, right? So it's just so our information systems should be configured and our processes should be designed in such a way that whatever be our ultimate end objective, we are working towards that. And obviously, every company has certain policies, right? I think we all must have seen policies in our corporate careers sometime or the other. So we have different policies like change management, information systems, cyber security, access management, and multiple other policies. So our systems should comply with those policies as well. And also, there are three important words, or which we refer to as principles, that information systems should follow, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Together, they are also called CIA triad. So whatever data or whatever information we have in our systems, they should have acceptable level of security. Now, if I talk about confidentiality, it simply means that the data should be confidential. The data should be protected. It should not be disclosed unless otherwise required. Integrity. The data should not be tampered with, or the data should not be changed or altered or modified in any unauthorized manner. In other words, the integrity or the reliability of the data should remain intact. And availability talks about that the data should be available as and when it is required, subject to the requisite access rights that people must have. Now, we shall talk about all these three things in very great detail in domain number 5. So domain number 5 has a very big discussion on the CIA triad. Now, what are the key objectives of IS auditing? The first basic objective of any auditing process be it IIS objective, financial audit, or any kind of audit. It is the compliance. Because auditing in itself is a profession that is highly compliance oriented. Now, that compliance can be relating to the laws, the regulations. It can also relate to certain standards, right, which are widely accepted in industry, such as your ISO standards, your OWASP principles, your NIST frameworks, your COBIT framework. So you have multiple industry-wide accepted standards. So the first objective of auditing is compliance. You ensure that your systems and your process as a whole is compliant to laws, is compliant to regulations, is compliant to the standards. The second is risk management. So if you remember, few minutes back, I was mentioning this thing that in today's time, we are not just checking or evaluating systems and processes. We take a risk-focused perspective. Now, what do I mean by that? See, every system or process has certain specific risk associated with it. Now, what is this risk? What is risk in general? See, risk is nothing but but it is a vulnerability that if exploited, it can have a massive impact to us, right? Or potential threats that can arise. So we have to have a risk focused perspective when we are auditing. So I'll just take you an example about the risk focused perspective. See, suppose, for example, whenever I am auditing any system of granting access right to the employees, then one of the risks that is associated with that particular process is that the access rights of the employees who have left the company, they might not be revoked in the required time, right? So there is a possibility of this thing happening. There is a risk associated with that, because if I am talking of employees who have left the company, there is a certain interdependence on other different processes as well. So you as an auditor need to have this perspective that what process I am working on, is there any certain degree of interdependence or interrelatedness with any other process, any other external factor, any other external system? This is just one of the ways of thinking risk. Or any kind of potential threat that might be there. For example, the change in regulation. Change in regulation also gives rise to a risk. For example, the government or the regulatory body, they came up with certain new regulation. Now, as per that regulation, we might have to change our entire system. That also is a risk. So your job as an auditor is to have that risk focused perspective, that what can be the potential threat. And obviously, risk should have certain basis behind it. You cannot just blindly say that flood can happen. No, there has to be certain possibility of it happening. That is the reason whenever we are calculating the risk, we consider likelihood of that event happening. Then, we consider it as part of our auditing process. We'll have a very great discussion on risk subsequently. And specifically, when I'm talking from a systems perspective, auditing also includes data integrity and security. Because, see, from a systems perspective, the major risk area is data security. Because systems are working on data, systems are processing data, systems are generating data. Without data, system has its no importance, or system will not function or work. The utility depends on the data, and the security of that data is ultimate, or is of ultimate importance to us, given the fact that the cybersecurity issues and threats are on the rise. So your job as an auditor is to make sure that the information assets, wherein you will see the word asset, it simply means information assets. Information assets are secured or safeguarded. Now, what is information asset? Information asset is any kind of technology related asset, such as server, laptop, Wi-Fi, even the copyrights or the source code of the software that you have developed. That also comes under information asset. Asset is nothing but anything that has value for the business. Okay. So source code of an application, even though you cannot touch it or feel it, but it has a value for the company. It has certain benefits associated with it. That is why it is also treated as an asset. So whatever technological or security assets we have, those need to be protected, and what controls are there in the company to make sure they are protected. Now, what do we mean by controls? Controls are nothing but the safeguards or the measures that we have to make sure that the risk does not materialize. Second, it is important that the integrity of information should be maintained. The same thing that I mentioned, CIA. Integrity means that the information or the data that we have, it should not be modified in an unauthorized manner, because that defeats the purpose of the information, right? If any kind of data is altered or changed, then appropriate log or appropriate, you know, change history of that change should be appearing in the system. It is very important that the information is available as and when needed. Now, when I'm talking about availability, it does not mean that information should be accessible to everyone. No. Availability simply mean that the information or the data, it should be available as when needed, provided the person who is accessing that information has the authority to do so, or the person is authorized to access the information. That is, so these three are the key important considerations to keep in mind whenever we are doing auditing: compliance, risk management, data security. Now, why audit is important? Because, like, one candidate in my earlier batch asked me that, Devansh, I have always seen auditing associated from a financial audit perspective. But why systems? Like, since when did we start auditing our technology? So this is why we are doing that. Why audit is important. See, first of all, verification of management claims. So, like, for example, you guys, because see, every particular company has certain people associated with it, not only employees but external people. Like, for example, if I take example of a bank has multiple people or stakeholders associated with it. Some are employees, some are in the capacity of customer, some are in the capacity of regulators, some are in the capacity of suppliers. So bank is not only answerable to its employees, it is also answerable to everyone, all the stakeholders, customers, employees, vendors, suppliers, regulators, everyone. So whatever claims the management is making, that if management is saying our systems are very robust, our customer data is protected, then auditing gives a level of assurance on the claims that are made by management, whether what management is claiming is actually even correct or not. If management is claiming that we follow very rigid data security standards, then as part of audit, we auditors, we evaluate whether the systems are actually even robust or they are just making any false claims, right? So whatever claim management is making, we verify that. So auditing serves to confirm the accuracy of claims that are made by management to stakeholders, ensuring accountability and transparency. Next, support for stakeholder trust. Now, when we as auditors give our ultimate level of assurance, then definitely that fosters the trust of stakeholders in the company. If we as auditors say that everything is working fine, then our evaluation is an independent and objective evaluation, right? So that gives a separate level of confidence to the people that, okay, everything is working fine. Regulatory compliance. Audits are very essential for compliance with laws and regulations, such as your data privacy laws, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which mandates rigorous auditing practices to prevent corporate frauds. Now, obviously, there are multiple numerous corporate frauds that have happened in the past, right? So the regulators, they themselves have included provisions or articles or sections relating to audit in the respective regulations they come out with. So even your GDPR or your data privacy law in India or the UAE data privacy law, they all mandate the data audit at certain specific period of time. Like in Indian context, it is annually. In GDPR, it is annually, right? So uh, regulations also have included the clause of audit that the companies who are falling in so and so purview, they should be subjected to audit. Now, what is Sarbanes-Oxley Act? See, first of all, now see, in today's time, the approach to audit has changed in a very drastic manner. We are not just checking the things that are presented to us, but we have to keep a risk focused perspective. Now, every process has certain risk associated with it. And to counter that risk, they have certain control that is there as part of the process. So, like if I just take a very small example, the risk that access rights, system access rights of the people who have left the company are not revoked within the required time frame. This can be one of the risk in the process. Now, to counter this risk, there can be a control which is part of that process. Now, this particular risk of system access rights not getting revoked within the desired time frame can have a control like something like the access rights of the people who leave the company are revoked within 24 hours, and there is a make a checker concept to make sure that access rights are revoked. So whenever we are doing an audit, we take into consideration what are the risks that are involved in the process, and to counter those risks, what kind of controls are there to make sure the risk does not materialize. Now, Sarbanes-Oxley Act was the first initiative to set this risk and control focused direction for audit. That is the reason we are studying Sarbanes-Oxley here. Sarbanes-Oxley Act initially first started with only financial testing. It stated that whatever risk and controls are there, whatever controls are there with respect to risk in financial processes, they should be evaluated or checked by an independent person within 90 days of the closure of the reporting period, right? So, and then it goes on to further saying that whatever be the results of the financial control testing, they must be signed by the top officials in the company, and also the company's auditors need to give their attestation on the same. And yes, this information needs to be publicly disclosed. Now, Sarbanes-Oxley Act started with financial controls only. However, in today's time, even from a systems perspective, a similar kind of approach is getting followed. That what we do, we have a risk-focused lens. We identify the risk that is associated with the process, the controls that are there, and then we also test those controls to make sure that the controls are working effectively. Right now, when we actually do an audit, there is a documentation which is called RCM, or risk control matrix. In some companies it is also called RCSA, risk control self-assessment, right? So this risk control matrix is the documentation that we ask from the company or the auditee for whom we are auditing. And this particular documentation has all the information about the risk that the process owners have themselves identified in the process, what controls they have established to make sure that risk does not materialize. And then what we do, we as part of our audit, we also, in addition to our audit procedures, we also test those controls that they have themselves identified for the risk to make sure that the controls are working effectively. Okay. And yes, such kind of an independent evaluation gives an assurance to the stakeholders. It fosters transparency and accountability within the company. Now, this was the very basic about audit. Now, what is your role as an IS auditor? What special you do, or what is expected from you? So first, as an auditor, it is very important that you have the required skills, qualifications, and competency. Because if you are examining or checking something, then you should have a fair level of understanding about that thing. If you are doing an ERP audit or a system audit, then you are expected to understand maybe programming, maybe certain ins and outs of the process, certain terminology associated with IT audits. So your qualification is your first prerequisite. Second, your planning and execution. 90%, if by any chance any particular audit fails, 90% of the times it happens because of poor planning. Your job as an auditor is first to figure out how you have to approach that particular checking. Because if, for example, somebody arranges me for a ERP audit, I just cannot go and straight away open the system and start checking things. No, I need to first understand what my scope is, what my scope of work is, how that system works, what is the role of that particular system or process in the company, what kind of input we are feeding into that process, what kind of output we are generating from that process, right? How that process is working, what is the SOP around the same, right? What are the policies of the company, what are the rules and regulations that are applicable onto the auditee. Once we have this level of understanding, then only we'll be able to figure out what we have to check and how we are going to do that. So your planning is very important, and execution. At the planning stage, you create a checklist. Now, that checklist serves as a guide when you are actually executing your audit. As part of that checklist, you include what all things you need to test and why you have to do that. So whenever I am preparing a systems audit checklist, if I am writing it down that I have to check access right, then I also mention which regulation states so, which standard states so. Like for example, ISO 27001 states that your access rights should be revoked, should be revoked in a timely manner. So whenever you make a checklist, your thoughts, your understanding should be very clear. Why you are checking and what you are checking. Because when you will be presenting your findings before management, management will never accept your findings unless you support your findings by any regulatory reference and the risk that is associated with it. At the top management level, at the C-suite level, they do not talk, they talk only in the language of risk and regulatory compliance. So that is the reason whenever we check something, we also need to get into that zone, that every observation and our checking should be around risk and should be around regulatory compliance. Third thing is evaluation of policies and control. I think we discussed it. Your job as an auditor is not just to read the documentation that is given to you. Your job as an auditor is also to comment on the adequacy and the completeness of that documentation. I myself have found multiple times wherein the SOPs or the policies were not comprehensive in any particular company, right? So if we are given any SOP, any policy of relating to any process, any system, it is important that we read it, but we also try to assess whether that documentation is complete, holistic, and in line with the best standards and regulatory framework. Next, advisory role. So sometimes as an auditor, your job is also to guide the management on legal and regulatory issues, right? Concerning systems and policy development. Now, as part of any systems audit report, we also mention a certain level of recommendation. I'll show you one actual IT audit report that I prepare for my clients. I'll show you how it looks like. Not today, but someday when we'll be done with it. Whatever observation we are giving, we also give a recommendation. Now, as part of recommendation, we come after audit. Once audit is done, we also recommend to the board that this is the finding that we came up with and what in our opinion you should do. So we also give a certain level of recommendation after associated with every finding. When we are giving a recommendation, we step into an advisory role that this is the thing that is problematic and this is how you can do it. Now, auditor is considering process reviews, change management, access approval, HR process, etc. We check and we also give our recommendations. Ethical considerations, it is important that we always uphold ethics, independence, and objectivity, right? To make sure there are no conflict of interest in the process. See, as auditor, it is very important that you remain independent of the company. Now, what do I mean by that? Suppose, for example, suppose, for example, I take an example of XYZ. It is a very big company, but I also have. I'm also a shareholder of that company. I have equity shares of that company. Say, suppose, for example, I am holding 5% equity shares of XYZ Limited, right? Now, if suppose I am engaged as an auditor for the same company in which I already have a 5% equity stake, would I be independent or honest? No, I won't be. Because what will I do? Since I have invested my money in that company, I will make sure that no findings or no observation gets reported in the report. Everything goes fine so that my equity value keeps on increasing. So independence is very important. You should not be associated with the auditee or the client in any other capacity other than that of the auditor. Not even as an employee, you should not be investor, or you should have no interest in that particular entity. That is what is called conflict of interest. I already am, for example, an investor in a company, and since I am a CISA, I was engaged as an auditor. So my judgment would be biased. I would never give a true image. So your job as an auditor is to make sure that you uphold independence. Ethics is what ISACA teaches you. As an auditor, it is important that you uphold the standards of ethical considerations. Act in a fair manner, objective manner, do not hide any information, do not accept any kind of favors or unnecessary solicitation from the client, so far and so forth. ISACA teaches you all. So maintain ethical conduct so that we as auditors can do our job in the most effective manner. There are different types of audits. First one is, so basically more so over, there are two major types of audits. First one is internal, second one is external audit. Now, what is internal audit? Internal audit is nothing but you are doing it internally. Remember it like this. Internal audit means doing it internally. Like, for example, there is a company, right? And there is a certain internal audit department in a company, right? Those people are also the employees of the company, but their job is just auditing. That's it. So they are on the payroll of the company. They are employees of the company, but their job is just to audit the systems and processes. Internal audit. So the company is internally checking itself. It is a kind of a self-assessment only. There is no third party or external person or someone from outside the company is coming in to do the checking, right? So that is what internal auditing is. It is most of the companies, they do both internal and external audit. Internal audit is something like, the company prepares itself before any external audit or a third party auditor comes into picture. The company prepares itself by, doing that internal audit so that they can figure out if there are any flaws or loopholes in the process. And every company has a certain audit charter. Now we'll see in subsequent slides what audit charter is. I would like to park this concept for now. In today's lecture, in subsequently, we'll see what audit charter is. So first, internal audit that the company is doing internally. Company itself is self-assessing its systems, its processes. The audit is still under the corporate umbrella. There are no external auditors or third-party consultants involved. External audit, as the name itself suggests, you have people coming in, coming into the company from external sources. like people like us. So companies, what they do is that apart from having an internal self-assessment, they also engage certain external independent auditors who are not employees of the company. They are completely independent of the company. They come in and they check the systems and the process. External audit is very important because we as external auditors, we don't have any, independence issues or conflict of interest in the company. Okay, so external audit means audit getting done by a third party. It is used for licensing and product approval. Sometimes, for example, whenever companies want to obtain certain license, or whenever they want to ensure compliance with certain standards like ISO 27001 or certain regulatory requirements, right? They have to engage independent auditors from outside to audit their process. Obviously, it is the most traditional form of auditing, and the audit team inspects the auditee, produces an audit report that can be used to gain a license. Your job as an auditor does not end until you give an audit report. And the entire effectiveness of audit process depends upon the quality and the output that you are giving in the form of audit report. Okay. Then the third is self-assessment. Now, self-assessment, typically it is taken as a part of internal audit only, wherein the company is evaluating its own practices. So sometimes companies use internal audit, sometimes they use the term self-assessment, but more or less, it is important that the company is itself self-assessing it so that it can prepare themselves before any external audit comes. Now, what are the different stages in the auditing process? The first one is planning. Obviously, as I said, you first define your audit scope. What do I mean by scope? See, whenever any external auditor is getting engaged, there is a letter of engagement that is executed between the auditee and the auditor. So auditor is, person who is checking the process, and auditee is the company, right? Whose systems or process the auditor is checking. So there is a letter of engagement that is executed between the auditor and the auditee. That letter of engagement is where the scope is defined of the audit. Scope is nothing but what you have to check, right? How much you have to check, in what time you have to check. That is your scope. Objectives is what is the purpose of this audit, whether it is regulatory compliance, whether it is, a company is doing it only for the purpose of its satisfaction, or whether the purpose is to obtain a license, whether purpose is to comply with any standard such as ISO or COVID framework, right? So what is the purpose of doing that thing? That is what is called objective. And the criteria again lists down the various criterias for the audit, or the various parameters for the audit on which the audit depends. It is very important that you as auditors identify the necessary resources. Now, what do I mean by resources? Resources does not only mean money, because see, as an auditor, you need to make sure that you have sufficient team, sufficient members. Because if I talk of myself, I just cannot do an application audit alone. I need five more people. Now, out of those five people, if I'm doing an application audit, I need to figure out, okay, I need two engineers, I need one developer, I need one coder, and I need one analyst. On the contrary, if, for example, I am doing a financial audit, then I don't need an engineer. I still need five people, but I don't need an engineer. I might need an accountant, I might need a commerce grad or some other people, but I don't need an engineer. So your job as an auditor is to figure out the necessary resources, including people that will be required for that audit, including softwares and applications that would be required. See, in today's time, everything is digitized. We are not manually checking everything. We as auditors have multiple tools and applications with us, right? For checking system, for doing the audit. So sometimes we also have to figure out what application or tool we need when we are doing that particular audit. Like, for example, if I am doing a forensic audit, there is an application called IDEA. I need that application so that I can take out certain sample, I can investigate the evidence. So you need to figure out as an auditor what resources you need, like manpower, technology, what other resources you need. it is very important that you develop a communication plan to ensure effective engagement. Now, see, your job as an auditor is to foster effective communication throughout. Communication between the team, communication with the auditee, communication with the regulators as well. When I am doing any systems audit for, I mainly work for banks and insurance companies. Okay. So whenever I'm doing any cybersecurity audit or systems audit for banks and insurance companies, right, my report goes straight away to the regulator that we have in India. For banks, it's Reserve Bank of India. For insurance companies, it's IRDAI. So my report goes straight to them. So sometimes I also have to maintain effective communication and coordination with external stakeholders as well, who are reliant on my audit, like regulators. So you need to make sure that there is an effective communication plan throughout, right? Among your team and also with the respective auditee. Second, field work. Field work is where your actual work starts. Once your planning is done, once your planning is done, once you have identified the resources, it is once your planning is done, once you have identified the resources, it is very important that you conduct the audit by gathering the required data. You evaluate the controls and you perform the testing. So what you do is that you conduct the audit, you gather the requisite data, you conduct the audit. Then second, obviously, you need to evaluate the controls, you perform certain level of testings, and you document the findings and assess the effectiveness of processes and controls. Once your entire work is done, you need to report. You need to prepare a report. You prepare an audit report, including findings, recommendations, overall conclusions. And it is important that once your report is prepared, everything is documented. You need to discuss your report with the management. We as an auditor, we cannot just straight away, issue a report. First, it is very important we draft a report, we discuss the same with the management, and ultimately your final report is issued after having discussions with the management. And obviously, you ensure follow-up action on the open items for compliance. So obviously, you must have identified certain observations as part of your report. So sometimes we auditors, we also are entrusted with the task of making sure that those findings and observations are closed. Now, there are three important terms: auditor, auditee, and client. So, auditor. So, auditor is someone who is making the audit activity or who is undertaking the audit. Then, auditee is the one who is being audited by the auditor. Then you have a client. The client or customer might be sometimes different from the auditee. Now, I'll just take an example. You, for example, there is a company, they have engaged me as an auditor because they have to go for ISO 27001 certification. Now, the auditor will be me, auditee will be the company, but the client or customer in this case will be the respective authority, the ISO authority to whom my report has to be submitted, which will accord them the certificate of compliance. So client or customer means sometimes the ultimate recipient or the end user for whom that particular audit is being undertaken. Now, every company has a committee called audit committee. Now, what is the role of audit committee? See, audit committee in every company, there is an audit committee. It is a committee of the board of directors. So, there are certain board of directors in a company, and these board of directors have certain separate committees, and each committee overlooks, or they look into something, some separate function that is entrusted to them. So audit committee is one of the committees of the board of directors. It is responsible for overseeing the financial reporting and the disclosures. Now, when I'm talking of audit committee, their job is to supervise and oversee the entire reporting process, including finance, IT, legal investigations. So whenever any audit is getting undertaken in any particular company, the report of that particular audit is always presented and discussed in the audit committee. right? Who are the ultimate recipient of that particular information. Now, access and communication. The head of internal audit and external audit representative have unrestricted access to the audit committee chairperson. So in every company, there is an internal audit department. The head of that internal audit department, commonly known as the chief internal auditor, and in case there is an external auditor who is engaged from outside, that person also has unrestricted access to the chairperson of audit committee. They can straight away escalate any information to the chairperson of audit committee, even during the audit, even during the course of audit, right? So the audit committee is responsible for raising concerns to the board of directors. Now, there is a documentation which is called audit charter, and this documentation is issued by the audit committee. See, audit charter is, it is a documentation which defines the overall purpose, authority, and responsibility of the audit activities, right? So audit charter gives you detailed information about the entire framework for auditing, right? What is the purpose? Who has the authority? Who has the responsibility? What will be the frequency of so and so audit? What the entire auditing framework is established in the form of an audit charter. Now, this audit charter is the documentation that actually establishes the internal audit function in a particular company, because the internal audit function is established keeping in line the requirements as stipulated by the internal audit, by the audit charter. And yes, audit committee ensures independence. It makes sure that there is effective oversight and independence in the auditing process. Now, what is an audit charter? Audit charter is a documentation issued by your audit committee that defines the purpose, means the objective, the authority, the responsibility of the internal audit activities or the audit activities. It establishes the internal audit function within the company. The audit charter must always be approved by the highest level of management, which in this case is your audit committee, and emphasizes the independence of the audit function from the executive management. What is executive management? Like your line managers, your process owners. So audit should be independent of that. Now, this audit charter serves as a guiding document for the entire internal audit process. What is the scope of the audit? What is the objective of the audit? How audit would be undertaken? What are the certain sensitive, critical areas that needs to be audited on a regular basis, right? So the entire ultimate guide for the auditing process. Then there is a concept called engagement letters. Now, whenever I am talking on engagement letters, I think I talked about this thing a couple of minutes back. So engagement letters is nothing but it is formalizing the delegation of task to external people. So if, for example, you are running a company, I am your external auditor, you are engaging me to do an audit of, say, any application like SAP, PeopleSoft, something. Then then there is an engagement letter which will be executed between us, wherein the company will be engaging me as an auditor to audit their process. This engagement letter needs to be signed by both the auditor and the auditee. Now, it is essential for the companies lacking in-depth knowledge of specific processes to hire trusted third parties for audits. So see, why companies go for external auditing? Definitely they want to obtain an independent, reasonable assurance, but sometimes they want, an assurance from people who are actually more skilled within that particular thing, who are more knowledgeable in that particular process. That is the reason people engage professionals like us, people who are CISA qualified, because obviously we command a certain prestige in the industry. They engage people like us to audit their process. So when companies lack in-depth knowledge of certain specific process, they engage people from outside who can guide them, find the potential errors, and also can tell them what needs to be changed. Always remember, engagement letter and audit charter are two different and distinct things. Engagement letter is focusing only on that specific audit. remember. If I am engaged for application audit, then engagement letter would only encompass that application audit only. But on the other hand, audit charter is broad, has a much broader scope. It is encompassing the entire governance framework. It is encompassing the entire, process, or the entire auditing process, establishing the entire governance framework around the auditing system, right? So engagement letter can never replace the audit charter. This was one of the questions that was asked in a former CISA examination, right? So always remember, engagement letter and audit charter are two separate things, and engagement letter never overrides or never replaces the audit charter. The examination asked, the question was something like, can engagement letter override the audit charter? No, it cannot, because audit charter is a broader governance framework that sets the entire direction for the auditing activities. And obviously, in today's time, outsourcing or third party engagement is increasing at a very rapid pace. So it is an increasing common practice to outsource system assurance and security through engagement letters. Now, using the services of experts. Now, obviously, sometimes companies also engage experts. So it can be engaged in the capacity of auditors, sometimes as consultants. So the entire trend in outsourcing arises because of expert availability, right? Or opinions of experts. So first of all, the considerations for outsourcing IS auditing and security services, we need to take into consideration the legal and regulatory restrictions, because we need to understand if there are any limitations that are imposed by law and regulations affecting outsourcing. I'll take you an example. From the viewpoint, from this is there in India and this is also there in European Union, that the services of data centers, it cannot be outsourced to certain specific countries, right? Or the information cannot move cross borders, certain specific information. So if any kind of regulatory restriction is there that can affect our engagement, we need to take into consideration that too. Also, it is important how the audit charter influences overall and specific audit objectives, ensuring alignment with the company goals. So whatever purpose, whatever approach to audit is defined as part of the audit charter, that should be in line with the company's goals, and accordingly, our engagement letters should be drafted in the same fashion. It is important that we emphasize the importance of independence and objectivity among the auditors and external experts to uphold the integrity of the audit process. So we as auditors should always remain independent and objective. ISACA Assurance Standard 1203, Performance and Supervision, and the IS Audit and Assurance Guideline 2006, using the work of other experts. These are certain standards given by ISACA. You can definitely read them in case you want to, but they do not come in your examination. But yes, gives you more information on how you are expected as an auditor to do your job, what are the ethical standards associated, what considerations you should keep in mind when you're engaging third-party experts, and the likes. Now, whenever you are engaging experts, you have to consider certain information. I think I've mentioned it in the previous slide too. First, regulatory and governance perspective, whether any restriction is there on outsourcing any particular activity. Second, audit charter. Third, impact on audit risk and liability. And fourth, independence and objectivity of auditors. See, there are obviously certain restrictions. So if I talk about specifically in the context of India and European Union, you have certain for banks, and for specifically if I talk in the context of banks cannot outsource the activities of policy creation to a third party. It is strictly prohibited, right? So it is important that the company takes into consideration what is prohibited and what is allowed, which activity we can outsource and what not. And obviously, the auditors needs to be independent. And yes, impact on IS audit risk and liability. right? Like what kind of risk is associated to it? Whether do we need any kind of third party experts or not, or we can resolve it internally and the likes. Also, it is important that whatever experts we are engaging, they should be competent enough, qualified enough, and experienced enough. The scope of it is important that we understand what is the work that is to be outsourced, what are the standards and methodologies around that particular work, what will be the method of communication of the audit results, whether it would be in the form of, a report, or do we need a report in a certain specific format, or sometimes do we need to publish it on our website or public forums, how that communication needs to be done. Then controls and compliance. There should be compliance with professional standards. There should be like supervisory and audit management controls. So when I'm talking of audit management controls, obviously auditing in itself is a process for any particular company. So there are certain controls that are around that particular process too. Those should be taken care of as well. Then what kind of system access, record access will be given to the experts or auditors? That is an important consideration. And yes, in this process, how will you ensure confidentiality? Then assurance and safeguards. Before you engage any expert or third party from outside, appropriate background checks needs to be done. Whether the particular entity is competent enough that they have the required technological tools, and non-disclosure agreements, also called NDAs, they should be signed before the conduct of the audit. Now, overall audit planning, first of all, it is very important. Overall audit planning, first of all, it is very important that you define the audit scope, right? Then second, you formulate the audit objectives. So what is the scope? Like, for example, I am doing a data audit, right? So my scope is to evaluate the controls and security mechanisms around database, who all can access it. That is my scope. Now, what will be my audit objectives? Data security, right? My audit objectives will be regulatory reporting, right? My audit objective can be strengthening the process and controls around data security. Then it is important you identify the audit criteria, you perform the audit procedures. Now, when I mean by audit criteria, it simply involves that you identify against what parameters will the efficiency and effectiveness of that audit will be based on. And yes, whatever scope audit procedures you have identified, you perform those audit procedures now. Now you review and evaluate the evidence. Obviously, you must have created a certain checklist. You will execute it. You will ask for required information from the auditee. The auditee will give you information, and now you will evaluate that information. Once you have evaluated and checked it, you would form audit conclusions and audit opinions. Now, always remember there is a difference in conclusion and opinion. So conclusion is the ultimate conclusion to a process, but opinion is something that, as per the professional judgment and professional understanding, right? This is what is. So a conclusion does not become, so an opinion does not become a conclusion always, right? So first, it is important that we create an opinion, and sometimes after a debate and discussion with management and process owners, that can become a conclusion as well. So it is important that we all formulate audit opinion and audit conclusions. And yes, you present a report to management after discussion with the key process owner. What is audit date? Now let's talk about audit date. Now, typically your question, there can be a question that you can think, when should we do an audit? Like, how should we know that audit should be done? Right? Does any law states this? How do we arrive at that? What is the frequency of audit? So sometimes, yes, regulation gives you that, like GDPR or data privacy law states that a data audit needs to be done once a year. So that is a regulatory audit, which is mandated by a regulator. Sometimes companies, they themselves, most of the companies, they themselves go for process audits, right? They themselves go for process audits. Like every quarterly, every half yearly, every monthly, they go for process audits. Now, naturally, your question can come, like, where it is written. How do we arrive at that? So obviously there can be certain specific known intervals which are suggested or which are recommended by your audit committee, right? So there can be certain known intervals. The audit can be done if regulation states so, if it gives you certain frequency. And third, audit can also be done ad hoc, right? When can it be done? Like, for example, we changed any particular system or a process and it is not working as expected. So we might think that let's call in an external auditor and see where we are going wrong. Next, there is a major change in risk environment. For example, until now, the the regulator states that data audit needs to be done once a year. But suppose tomorrow they came up with a new law that states that data audit needs to be done every month. So there is a dynamic change in risk environment. This gave rise to the risk of penalties or regulatory risk if we did not comply with the regulation. So there was a sudden change in regulation, right? So if there is a major change in risk environment, then definitely audit can be done then. If enhanced evaluation needs to be done. So sometimes, what happens, we are engaged, the process I am auditing, the same process was audited 2 months back by some other auditor as well. But since they engaged me again, because sometimes what companies want, they want an enhanced evaluation. They want a new way of checking that process. So quite often it happens to me that the auditee states that do something different in the audit. Don't just fill the checklist or read the SOP and check it. Do something different. Find some different interrelationship or linkage for us that we might be missing out on. So when they have to do an enhanced evaluation or they want to figure out something that was not known earlier, then also audit can be arranged. And yes, obviously, if there is a significant problem, and audit report requested for investigation. So sometimes what happens is that we as auditors, we flagged any finding, right? I suggested, like, in one of my clients, I remember I suggested that encryption was not proper. Data was not getting encrypted as it should be. Now, when I mentioned this observation, the company had to full-fledgedly engage third-party experts to make sure that the entire cryptographic and encryption, process is in line and order. So sometimes, as a consequence to an audit finding, companies have to go for an ad hoc audit. So there is no such specific frequency for audit. If regulator states so, you do that. But most of the time, it is an internally decided decision by the company. So there are certain terminologies you should be aware of. Audit subject. Subject is the area that is to be audited. This is done by conducting risk assessment by prioritizing the areas to be audited. Like, for example, suppose the company has engaged me to audit the entire information systems process for them, which includes multiple other sub processes like access right, data centers, data privacy, cryptography, network infrastructure, so far and so forth. Now, when I am doing any particular audit, I need to do a risk assessment as an auditor on my own too, that which areas should I focus on most. So as an auditor, obviously, there will be multiple checkpoints and multiple areas for you to focus on. But you need to do your risk assessment to figure out which areas are the most risky or which areas possess the most risk that I should prioritize on. Right? So audit subject is the area that you have to audit, but that area is very big. In that area, you have to follow a risk assessment and figure out which sub areas or sub processes or applications need to be prioritized. Like, for example, if I am doing the audit of entire information technology department, I would prioritize areas like data security, databases, data centers, encryption, right? I would prioritize them first, right? So that risk assessment is your independent professional judgment. No book or anything can tell you how you have to do that. They will just say, use your professional judgment, which areas are most risky. Obviously, you can have an understanding as and when you get familiar with the process. Then audit objective is the purpose of the audit, why we are doing it. Is law saying that? Is a contract saying that? Sometimes what happens, companies enter into contract with a customer or someone, and that customer wants the company to get its systems audited once a year. So what is causing that contract, right? So the ultimate purpose of audit, it can be contractual requirement, regulatory requirement, okay, it can be any. Then scope of the audit. It is important that you identify specific process, specific systems that needs to be subjected to review. Scope helps in resource management and identify the resources needed for a successful engagement. Now, whenever you are planning for an engagement, you have to do a certain pre-audit planning. If you remember, we talked about planning in a very basic, faded manner in previous slides. Now, what is pre-audit planning? It is important that you identify the technical skills and resources that are needed. You identify the sources of information for test or review, such as flowcharts, policies, standards, and work papers. So pre-audit planning is before audit, you as an auditor are doing your job, you're planning. What kind of people I need, what kind of data I need, what kind of documentation I need, what will I do with this information, how will I check it, right? What I have to audit. Do I have to audit this particular thing, or I have to go somewhere else and audit that thing as well, right? And you develop a communication plan. You also go for development of audit procedures. Audit procedures is nothing but your audit approach. That gives an insight as to how actually you are going to do things. So as part of pre-audit planning, you first figure out, okay, I need this policy, I need this data, but what am I going to check with that data? How am I going to do that? That is what is your audit procedures are. What actually field work or what actual ground execution you will be doing, that is what audit procedure is. So you identify and select the audit approach to verify and test the controls. You develop audit tools, methodology to test and verify the control. You describe who to communicate, when to communicate, how often to communicate, and what purpose. Identify the criteria for evaluating the test. So for example, you as an auditor, have to come up with certain criterias as well for evaluating the data. Like for example, if I am checking any particular kind of data, then there has to be certain benchmarks, certain parameters, certain materiality level beyond which the deviations should not go, right? So I need to have a certain criteria for evaluating the data. Like out of 100, if more than 2 or 3 instances of irregularities are found, then this is a very risky area for me, right? So you develop a criteria for testing. You formulate audit plan, and audit plan is considered as the first critical step in auditing. So in a nutshell, whatever be the entire auditing flow that we studied, this is what it is summarized as a table. You first pre-plan, right? You have the audit charter, you do a risk assessment, you determine if the audit is possible and probable, which areas needs to be audited, right? Once you have your pre-planning done, you actually plan it, wherein you plan the audit, right? You have formulated all your audit procedures, you have done your homework, you have done your risk assessment. Now you actually formulate a detailed plan which includes everything: your risk assessment, your audit procedures, and everything. And you develop test steps. As an auditor, you need to develop test steps which are part of audit procedures. What are test steps? Test steps are nothing but what you will be checking and how. So like for example, if my audit is relating to access right checking, then I would create test steps. How I will check access rights. For example, I will log into the system. I will check what different user privileges are created. I will see when users were created. I will see when user rights were modified. I would see when the rights of people who have left were revoked. So I would create detailed test steps as my methodology of audit. How will I do? Because always remember, you have to maintain everything as part of your working papers. Next, you do your ultimate field work and you do the reporting. Now, what is risk-based auditing? I think I gave you a very basic discussion on risk-based auditing earlier too. What is risk-based auditing? It is focusing on evaluating the process for audits based on a risk assessment. So as I said, you understand the process, you figure out what is the risk, what are the risky points in that particular process, right? You ask for risk control matrix, RCM, from the client, sorry, from the auditee. You have that document with you wherein they themselves have identified certain risk. You use your professional judgment to figure out whether the company has already identified all the risk or this in some information is lacking. So you need to have a risk-based approach. You identify all the processes that may be subjected to an audit. You perform a risk assessment for each process to determine overall risk. For example, I am doing the audit of the entire IT department, which has multiple processes. Sorry. What I would do a risk assessment to figure out which process has the most risk, which has the least risk. That would help me in prioritizing my work, and accordingly, what is the overall risk. So certain processes would be more risky as compared to other. And yes, audit plan development. You build an audit plan prioritizing the processes that are at high risk. So like for certain, fintech and startups and banks, I do full-fledged IT audits for the entire IT department. What I do is that I always prioritize risky areas. For example, like database and data security is the most risky area for me. Network security is most risky. Followed by that, server and infrastructure is more risky, right? So I have to prioritize and accordingly I plan my work. You incorporate both short-term and long-term planning. There are certain activities that you need to check in short-term, certain in long-term, right? For example, if you must have heard about business continuity planning, disaster recovery drills, all this relates to long-term approach only. We'll see subsequently, but your perspective should include both short-term, that, immediate considerations, and long-term from a long-term perspective for the processes. Now there are more terminologies. First, you have audit universe. Audit universe means the complete set of processes and areas that may be subjected to an audit. For example, if I am auditing the IT department for a bank, and bank has 25 processes like database, server, network, right, multiple processes. So my total work that I have to do, that will be my audit universe, right? So if I have to audit all 25 processes, then my audit universe means 25 processes. What is the importance? It provides a framework for identifying and prioritizing audit targets based on risk assessment. As I said, I first figure out, now as an auditor, I do this job when I am actually, in a pre-audit planning phase. I figure out what is my audit universe. It is 25 process. It is 25 process, and I would prioritize the high risk and low risk areas. Then there is different types of planning. Short-term planning, issues that are to be covered within 1 year. Long-term planning, wherein we are focused on long-term issues like strategic direction or changes in that direction. What my long-term planning is. So I think we are halfway through the session. So in the meanwhile, do you guys have any questions on whatever we studied so far, whatever your expectations or anything you want to talk to me? Let's take 10 minutes and let's, if you guys have anything you want to discuss with me, unmute yourself and let's discuss on it. Let me know if you guys have any input, anything, or you want to talk or discuss with me now.
Hello, Devansh. This is Joy. I have a quick question, if I may. I believe we get access to the recording and the mock exam and all that. Is it possible to get a copy of the presentation as well?
Definitely, sir. So you will get, okay, my bad, I did not mention this at the start of the session. So I'll also inform you about what material you would get. See, There are 5 domains in examination. We have 5 separate PowerPoint presentations for that is one presentation for one domain. So you would get access to all the 5 presentations. In addition to that, you have a certain question bank which we have created for all 5 domains. You would get access to those. In addition to that, we have also created certain lecture notes as well, in addition to PPT, which you would also get access to. So this particular presentation that you are seeing right now, I believe you might receive it by tomorrow at the max. I hope
Thank
that
you so
answers
much. So it will be emailed to us. Is that what you're saying?
Sir, I hope you are part of that WhatsApp group, right? Which is
I
created.
am, yes.
Yes. So every day, what's going to happen? The support team will share the link of material and the link of recording. You will have all the thing on that link.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
No worries. Any further thing, any further information, you want to ask?
Yes, actually, I have a question. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, alhamdulillah. What's the best way to prepare for the exam? And what's like the time frame to prepare for it?
Oh, Yasir, that's a very amazing question that you asked. Like, what is the best way and what is the time frame? So, okay, so I would answer that. So, first thing is that the best way to prepare the exam is to solve as many questions as you can. See, because in the examination, if candidates if they are unsuccessful, they are not unsuccessful because they don't know the concepts. Everyone knows the concepts, but they are unsuccessful because they are not in the habit of sitting for 4 hours. They are not in the habit of handling that exam pressure and solving the questions, right? So your approach should be to limit your material, your texty material, and solving as many questions as you can. Try to get the habit of sitting for 4 hours and in that examination mindset, sitting for 4 hours and getting that focus. Because I have students who come up and say to me that, Devansh, after 2 hours we were not able to think anything, our focus got lost. I have students who say this to me, like their brain stopped working after 2 hours. So it is important that we familiarize ourselves with this thing. We familiarize ourselves with the stress, with the way the exam is conducted, and just read text and the concept from one particular source, whatever you feel is important, trusted for you, but solve as many questions. Try to target at least 600 questions before you sit for your final examination. Next, give mock test, which our academy will give. Second, ISACA also goes for certain mock test, appear for those. Third important thing, there is no specific time frame, because see, I have students who have qualified in 1 month. I have students who have taken 2 years to qualify. I have students who have qualified examination just within 10 days after the batch was done. So just 3 days back, one of my student texted me that, Devansh, I got the examination cleared, and the second batch just ended, I think 1 month back only. So there is no such specific time for it. What is most important is that give yourself 3 months dedicatedly, sit for 2-3 hours on a daily basis. 3 months, DJ, give yourself 3 months, solve questions, understand concepts, and solve as many questions as you can. And obviously, we are here. If you still find any difficulty, drop us an email or use WhatsApp group and we'll help you out. I hope that answers your question, sir.
It is clear. No, thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Any further question?
Yeah, I just had one quick what do you call conceptual question, Devansh. So I pasted in the chat as well. So as you were explaining about the audit role, right, initially, so you mentioned that it is an advisory role, we all know. But what I wanted to know is why is it always considered advisory? Because as an external auditor, we never provide any so-called guidance that how you should do. We just provide our opinion, independent auditor opinion. So but we are still the external auditors are still auditors, right? So why is that role an advisory role considered?
Ma'am, whenever we are talking from an external auditor perspective, when our reports get discussed, or when we are presenting our findings to the management, we as even as external auditors, we are also like if I talk of myself, every auditee I've worked for, they have always asked me to include our recommendations as well as part of our final report that is submitted. So specifically in the technology industry, I have seen this, not in, see, I do both financial audits and tech audits. In financial audits, I have not seen this much, but in technology audits, almost 100% of the times I have to give my recommendation as well towards the end of the report, recommendation relating to overall, you know uh, overall, what is the structure, what are the controls, what are the effectiveness of the controls. So even as external auditors, we are expected to provide certain recommendations on the existing process, on the existing controls, on the existing technological infrastructure that they have. So in that perspective, we are taken up, we are assumed, sorry, I mean, in that perspective, our role is also taken as an advisory role as well, because our job does not just end by giving the findings, but sometimes we also have to, step into the role of an advisor, make certain recommendations, and maybe sometimes, we as external auditors are even assigned follow-up audits, wherein whatever findings we gave, we have to also do a follow-up audit on those findings to figure out whether those audits were actually even closed or not. So keeping in mind this entire framework of audit, it is also sometimes taken up that even external audit is also an advisory role. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
If you need more clarity on it, or you have any further thought, you can debate with me to any extent you want. Definitely, that's open. Yeah.
No, it was not about debate. It was just like I never had an experience where the clients actually came up. Rather, I was told not to give any recommendations when I was, reporting the findings or giving the auditor's opinion in the report. So I was particularly told that we do not, as a practice, we do not do. So that was where I got a little confused. Uh,
It
That's what.
depends, ma'am. It depends on companies, to be very honest. See,
Mhm.
if I talk of external audit, from the viewpoint of a statutory perspective, definitely it is an assurance role and not an advisory role. I would totally agree with you, because it is from a statutory perspective, it is a statutory assurance role and not an advisory role, because you have to provide an independent opinion. And when you mentioned that, that we are not allowed to advise, it is because that could impact our independence. That is, we are not allowed to advise. So if I talk from that perspective, external audit is, not a very complete advisory role as compared to an internal audit, which is more or less an advisory role, because under external audit, you are more oriented towards providing an independent assurance.
Yeah.
But given the fact that industry is changing, I have seen that, and even ISACA states that your job as an the auditing profession in itself is very much changing. So to a certain extent, sometimes we are also expected to give recommendations and follow-up audits too. So yeah, uh, that's my answer. It's a little bit mixed of an answer, but yes, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes, Devansh. Thank you.
No worries. So let's take a quick, 10-minute break, and I think we shall be back in next 10-12 minutes. Thank you. Okay. Hi team. Okay. Hi team. We are back. Let's wait for. I think we all are here. No one has left. So I think we can start straight away. Towards the end of the session, we'll solve certain questions every day on the respective topic that we have studied, so that from day one we are confident on the examination. Okay. So I hope my screen is visible. Let's start. So before going back on the break, we talked about audit. We talked about the basics of auditing. What is the process? Now we are taking each step into details of the about the audit process. The first one is audit planning. Now, whenever we are talking about audit planning, okay, see what are the steps that are involved in audit planning process. First of all, it is very important that you understand the business mission, objectives, and whatever process is involved that you are auditing. It is important that you understand the business environment in which that business is operating. Like, for example, whether it is highly regulatory driven like banks, or it is highly customer orient, it is highly D2C business or P2B business, what kind of business environment it is operating in, what are the risks, challenges, and what are the changes in the business environment. Because obviously business environment is something that is not in the control of the company. Business environment keeps on changing in a very dynamic manner. Next, it is important to review work papers or audit reports. Sometimes, as external auditors, we are given access to the reports of internal audits or whatever audits we have undertaken during the year, typically internal audits only. So if any kind of supplementary material such as audit report or prior working papers are given to us, we review that. It is important that we review the policies, the standards that are there in the company. We understand the laws and the regulations. It is important that we understand the organization structure. Now, structure simply means that who is sitting at the top, what are the committees of board of directors, who are the different people who are part of the committees of the board of directors, right? And how like how is line management structured, what kind of hierarchy we have, do we have managers, do we have supervisors, do we have seniors, assistant managers, how the entire organization structure is done. It is important that you perform a risk assessment to identify the areas of high risk. Obviously, as part of any particular audit or any particular process, it is important that you need to identify which areas pose the highest risk. And obviously, you have to, after understanding all of this, the business environment, regulatory landscape, the risk, the challenges, prior working papers, policies, standards, risk documentation, and everything, you create a scope and objectives. It is important that you develop an audit strategy, right? Now, whenever I'm talking of audit strategy, it includes everything, right from the pre-planning phase to the ultimate delivery of final report. Your audit planning, documentation, everything comes in between. And yes, you build the audit team. Now, there are multiple kinds of audits, right? So there is one category of audit, which is basically the most common, which is also called audit based on targets, right? I think the name itself suggests target is something that, some certain objective that target means certain specific objective that we are trying to focus on. Okay. So that is what audit is. So that is what it is. So first we have financial audit. What is financial audit? So first we have financial audit. So first we have financial audit. As part of financial audit, we assess the integrity. We assess the integrity of financial records and accounting practices against certain specific established standards, right? So I think this is the most basic kind of audit that we are talking about, the financial audit. We must have heard it sometimes or the other. we must have, heard of financial audit sometimes or the other. So as part of financial audit, we take into consideration like evaluation of the financial records. We take into consideration like evaluation of ledgers, balance sheets, income statement, and all the likes. So whatever financial records we have, we try to assess the integrity of the financial records, that they are authentic, they are not tampered with. And yes, whatever accounting practices they are following, they are against the established standards. Then you have operational audit. So what is operational audit? Operational audit is nothing but, you must have heard about, process driven audit or process audits or something like that. That is what operational audits are, wherein we are evaluating the effectiveness of the operational practices. What are operational practices? Things that are operational, or things that are working on a day-to-day basis, like any kind of a process. For example, it can things that are any kind of a process. It can relate to any process, any IT driven process, any financial process, any human resource department process, or any kind of process. So we assess the effectiveness of the overall operational practices and process within the company. Then you have third, IS audit, information systems audit, the audit which we will be concerned with the most as part of our discussion. That is wherein we examine information systems to ensure that they safeguard assets, maintain integrity and availability, provide maintain and availability, provide reliable information, achieve company goals, and use the resources efficiently. Then we have something which is also called as integrated audit. Then we have something that is also called integrated audit, wherein we focus on risk and involves a collaborative team of auditors with diverse skill sets to produce a comprehensive report. Now, one thing that I would like to mention out here is that sometimes companies go for integrated audit. Now, let's take a moment to understand what integrated audit is. Let's take a moment to understand what integrated audit is. So whenever I'm talking about integrated audit, sometimes what companies do is that whenever they are going, for example, a full-fledged audit of their company, right? Typically, this happens once in a year, wherein they have to audit everything, like financial processes, technology process, every process. What they do is that they sometimes engage multiple auditors who have the requisite skill set, right? So for example, I am engaged as an IT auditor. There is some other company like PwC or Deloitte, they have been engaged as a financial auditor. There is some other company which is engaged as, some CPA firm engaged as, for example, they are doing audit of the HR department. So sometimes we have multiple auditors who are involved in that particular auditing process. Now, since we have multiple auditors involved in that process, but we need to produce a single specific audit report, right? Because what we are doing, we are auditing the entire organization. But since different auditors have the different skill sets, the companies engage multiple auditors to collaborate together. Now, the auditors do their respective job, they generate their respective report, but towards the end, an integrated audit report is generated, which includes the the findings, the viewpoints, the checking of all the auditors who have participated in that process. So that is an integrated audit. So yes. Now we move on to the nitty-gritties of this particular. Now we move on to the nitty-gritties of this particular process. There is one thing which is called standards on auditing. There is one thing which is called as standards on auditing, or we also refer to as auditing standards. Now, these are certain auditing standards which have been given, which we have to follow, and which gives us a clear cut, a standard particular way or a methodology of doing certain specific things, right? So like, for example, if I talk of auditing standards, they give you information as to how you have to plan an audit, how you have to think about going an audit, what information should be there in engagement letters, what is materiality, what materiality would be there, how we have to select sample for an audit, because obviously I cannot check everything. I have to take certain sample to check the audit, right? So standards on auditing, what the statements on auditing standards, or auditing standards simply as we say, they are statements on auditing standards that are issued by ASB, Auditing Standards Board of AICPA. Your ISACA has also introduced certain auditing standards, right, which we as auditors should be aware of, and they cover the entire process, right from planning to execution to evidence gathering to testing. Everything is mentioned out there. Just a general methodology as to what we have to follow to make sure that that our audit is as per the prescribed standards on auditing, right? So these standards, they provide us certain specific guidance on conducting various aspects of audit engagements. Now, what are the key areas of guidance? The key areas of guidance in these standards on auditing, they cover all the key areas, right from planning, evidence gathering, internal control, planning, evidence gathering, internal control, communication, and with management, financial statement reporting, everything. So these standards on auditing, they cover all the areas, and they give us certain guidance as to how we as auditors, we have to act, how we have to think, what all considerations we should keep in mind. Also, these standards are required that every auditor follows them, so that there is greater consistency and quality, because these standards ensure there is uniformity in the auditing profession. And they obviously, these standards maintain a certain degree of professionalism in the auditing process, and it facilitates compliance with different auditing standards across different countries. Because if I talk about standards on auditing given by AICPA or given by ISACA, these, they are applicable in all the in all the countries wherever we are doing audit. So if we are doing an audit, if we are doing an IS audit, for example, in India, and we are doing an IS audit, for example, in America, we have to follow the same auditing standards. So this ensures there is a certain level of consistency across the auditing process. Then we have some other kinds of audits as well. The first one, we have a process audit, and the second one, we have a product audit. Now, specifically, when I'm talking for a particular process audit, we are evaluating the activities against certain published requirements. So typically, I think we all know about this, that every process has a certain SOP, standard operating procedure. Every process has a certain manual, which gives us information as to how that process should work, right? So under process audit, what we do is that we make sure that whatever is we make sure that whatever is actually happening is in line with what should happen. So the process note or the SOP gives you information as to how the process should work. So you read it, understand it, and then you check whether the actual process is in line with the literature or not. And obviously, your objective is to make sure that processes are followed as intended. Certain standards that are set internally within the company, they are complied with. And also sometimes, as part of process audit, we undertake two activities called business impact analysis and business process reengineering. We'll study about these in very great lengths and depth subsequently, but I'll just give you a certain food for thought on this. See, business impact analysis talks about what will be the impact of any particular happening or any particular risk on your particular process, and what workarounds do we have in that particular situation. How do we plan to counter that particular risk? How do we plan to control that particular impact? That is what BIA talks about. Business process reengineering talks about making changes in the existing process. So sometimes there are certain processes, for example, there is a particular process which was manual, but now company wants to make it complete automated. So they have to change the existing process, right? That is called reengineering of business process. We have very long discussions on both of these topics in domain number 3 and 5. Then we have product audit. Under product audit, what we do is that we compare the attributes against design specifications. Now let's talk about it. So for example, what is product audit? Every company has certain specific, now if I'm talking from a, an IT perspective or an IS perspective, I am talking from an application level perspective. So like, for example, I have to go for any application audit, right? So these guys will give me the business research document of that application, the business blueprint of the application, the technical specification of that application. I would read it, understand it, and then I would check whether the application is working as per the desired specifications or not. So typically this kind of thing is taken care of whenever someone saying something, sorry. Okay. Typically, this kind of audit is taken care of, is undertaken, or we decide to go for any particular product audit, typically whenever we are developing an application. So what we do is that whatever application, for example, we are developing, or any application that we have already developed, we try to match, or we try to check whether the actual application is in line with the intended specifications or not. And we check the functional criteria. Functional criteria is nothing but how that particular application is functioning, how how its interface is, how it is interacting with the respective stakeholders, how are we taking the inputs, how are we generating the outputs, is our outputs in line with what is expected, are all the validations working or not, and the likes. Then you have forensics and technical certifications audit. Under forensic audit, I'll tell you, I also work very actively in forensics and digital forensics. So typically what happens in forensics audit is that these forensic audits are typically, we are engaged as a forensic auditor when a fraud exists. So whenever we are doing an actual audit, so, or for example, whenever we are doing any audit other than forensic audit, be it IS audit, financial audit, what we do, we check and we figure out whether any irregularities or observations are there. Under forensic audits, most of the time what happens is that we are doing an investigation. Typically, we are engaged most of the times by law enforcement authorities or regulatory bodies, and we have to do an in-depth investigation to figure out fraud or crimes. So how typically forensic audits happen with me? I'm also empaneled with certain regulators in India, certain law enforcement agencies. So they come up to me saying that they are sure that a fraud has happened, or they suspect that a fraud is going on. And then they engage me stating that you check only from this particular perspective and let us know whether this fraud has actually happened or not. So under forensic audit, your focus is not on finding observations or findings. Your focus is on discovering or unearthing fraud and crimes, something very serious. Your focus is on figuring out illegal acts, irregularities. And technically, forensic audit is not an audit, it is an investigation. What you do, you investigate things in a very detailed manner. In forensic audit, there is no such thing as sampling. You have to check everything, right? So more or less, forensic audits are like investigations, they are less audits. But typically, the purpose is to discover fraud. Then you have technical certification audits. What are technical cert audits? What you do is that whatever systems or processes you have, you make sure they are in line with certain standards. I'll give you an example. See, NIST or OWASP gives you certain specific coding, baseline coding practices, right? Or ISO 27001 gives you certain information as to how IT systems and your ISMS and your controls should work. Okay. So what you do is that you are evaluating a system, you are evaluating a certain process against certain standard, right? Now that standard I gave, like, for example, ISO 27001, or if I have to evaluate the coding practices, I refer to OWASP coding principles, right? You make sure you evaluate the system configurations, you evaluate the system management against certain standards that are associated to it. and they are industry-wide recognized standards. Remember, under technical certification audits, you are not just blindly checking the application functionality with the user manual or the business blueprint. You are checking the compliance with the industry-wide standards that are associated. Then you have a thing called administrative audit and compliance audit. Uh, oh, 1 second. I think my camera stopped working, right? Let me open my camera. Okay. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. Okay, my camera stopped working. Yeah. Now I think it's working. My bad. Okay. Now we have a thing called administrative audit and compliance audit. Under administrative audit, your focus is on verifying the existence and implementation of policies and procedures. So typically under administrative audit is that what you just take into consideration that they have the required documentation with them or not. Like, for example, if they have a particular process, they have a documentation associated to it. You typically do not go into the nitty-gritties of the process. You do not try to match, or you do not try to check the entire process basis on documentation. You just make sure that an administrative framework is there in the company, right? To make sure that everything is governed by a certain specific literature. So you ensure there are policies, there are procedures, there are manuals, there are risk matrix, all such kind of documentation is present. Then you have compliance audit, as the name itself suggests. Sometimes you have to go for audit in order to comply with the regulation. Like, for example, or regulatory audits. So regulatory audits fall under compliance audits only. So sometimes, for example, like GDPR's or data privacy law in India and UAE also states that a data audit needs to be done by a data auditor once a year. So that is a compliance audit, that whatever regulations are there, you are ensuring compliance with that. You ensure that the company is following necessary compliance items such as policies and system settings. So what do we mean by compliance items? See, compliance items, from the viewpoint of compliance audit, compliance items typically mean the entire framework to make sure that we are complying with the regulation. So for example, if GDPR states that the companies who are storing personal data of data subjects, they have to get a data audit done by a data auditor once a year. So in order to ensure that this requirement is satisfied, there has to be an entire framework in the company, such as if data audit needs to be done, then a policy should be there around the same. A procedure should be there around the same. Technology should be there around the same. If there is technology, then settings or configurations of that technology should be in accordance to that, to make sure, the entire framework complies with the regulation. So that is what here we are talking about. Compliance items mean the items or the elements of that particular framework which contribute together to make sure the regulation and the regulatory requirements are complied with. Then there is a thing called surveillance audit. Now, under surveillance audits, what typically happens? Okay, I'll tell you. If by any chance you have heard of ISO 27001, it is one of the most baseline standards when it comes to information security, giving you the bare basic requirements, bare minimum controls about information security. So typically what companies do is that they get themselves ISO 27001 certified. But after, for example, every 5 years, they need to get a recertification, right? So as to remain the status intact. Now, what happens is that surveillance audits are typically undertaken during that period between certification and recertification. So for example, if in the year 2020, my company took ISO 27001 certification. In the year 2025, that particular certification will be renewed because it is valid only for 5 years. Now, in 2025, I will go for a recertification audit so that my ISO certification remains valid. Now, this intervening period between the certification and recertification, during this period, whatever review of system process or checks we do to make sure that when the recertification audit comes, right, to make sure that when a recertification audit comes, we are all prepared for recertification and we will get recertified again. So in that particular period, we undertake a surveillance audit. So if now in that particular intervening period of 5 years, we would constantly check our systems in line with ISO 27001 to make sure when a recertification audit comes, then no issue or problem should arise. ISO standards have also given a frequency of surveillance audit, which is 6 months. But again, this is not something very rigid. Companies, most of the times companies take a even more limited number of frequency, like 3 months. I have seen most of ISO certified companies, they are undertaking surveillance audits after every 3 months, right? But typically, 6 months is what is given by ISO standards, which state that recertification or surveillance audits should be done every 6 months. So most of the times companies follow this, or taking a more conservative approach, they sometimes follow even a more like instead of 6 months, they go for surveillance audits every 3 months. So, right, that is what surveillance audits is. Now, let's understand and have a brief discussion on the code of ethics by ISACA. See, first of all, don't read the entire professional ethics, because in most of my previous batches, students always ask that, Devansh, do we have to actually read the entire professional ethics code by ISACA? Because if you go on their website and try to read it, there are so many standards in it. So right now, don't do that. Because even in examination, they don't expect you to know all the standards and code of professional ethics, right? Just understand the gist of it, what they are saying, and what you should remember. And the same I have mentioned out here. So first of all, as per ISACA, the code of professional ethics gives you, a certain makes the professionals, the ISACA members, the certification holders to comply with certain specific requirements relating to ethics. For example, independence, objectivity, professionalism, professional skepticism, all this is the same thing, that as a professional, you need to behave in an ethical manner, you need to comply with certain ethical standards and the likes. So ISACA also states that non-compliance of professional ethics can lead to the certificate revocation. For example, if any particular professional is having a CISA CISA certificate or a CISM certificate, and they are found indulging into gross negligence, or they were in a position of compromise in some of the assignments, then definitely ISACA also has the right to revoke the membership status or certification status of that professional too. So always remember, the code of professional ethics by ISACA is applicable to all ISACA members. Whether you are a CISA professional, a CISM professional, a CRISC professional, whatever certification you have from ISACA, CDSSP, whatever, the ethics are applicable to all, and they are same for all. Adherence is part of certification process. Non-compliance can lead to revocation. Core statements of the code. First of all, compliance. So what happens is that the code of professional ethics, they support the standards that are given by ISACA for effective governance of enterprise information systems. Now, what do I mean by that? The standards that are given by ISACA in relation to systems audit, right, as to how we as auditors should undertake our audit. Now, this code of professional ethics complements those particular standards too, because since we are auditors, we should know how to do our job, which are given by the auditing standards, and then we should also know how we have to act, what should be our ethical conduct. That is given by Code of Professional Ethics. This makes sure there is effective governance of enterprise information systems and appropriate reporting. Professional conduct, you should act with objectivity, due care, and due diligence, right? Then stakeholder interest, it is important that these professional code of ethics, they are serving the stakeholder interests lawfully, right? Because if anyone is reading a report that is certified or that is signed by a CISA holder, right, then definitely they have a certain specific they have a certain specific service standard that they associate with ISACA, right? So if ISACA has given us the CISA certification to me, then the recipients of my report will have this comfort in mind that he's CISA certified, ISACA has certified this person, then definitely, he must be having certain standard and he must be upholding the quality, the prestige that is associated with ISACA. Right? So in this way, the code of professional ethics binds our actions, binds us as professionals to certain quality standards that we should always observe. And obviously, it is important that we as professionals should avoid actions that could discredit the profession. And importance of adherence to professional standards is because it ensures integrity, trust in the profession, and upholds the reputation of ISACA and its members. Herein, I have just mentioned out certain important pointers from the entire code of ethics given by ISACA, and so far no questions come out from no questions have been asked from areas more than this. So this much is enough for your examination perspective. So first of all, you as a professional, you should support and encourage compliance with standards and procedures for effective governance of enterprise information systems and technology. In other words, whatever standards and procedures are there in the company, right? Whatever standard operating procedures are there, whatever industry-wide standards like ISO or NIFT framework, COBIT frameworks, whatever we have, we need to make sure that is getting complied with. We as auditors should act with objectivity, due care, and due diligence. In other words, we should not be biased. We should be objective in our working and evaluation, and we should be detailed oriented. Due diligence here stands for detailing, attention to detail. So auditing as a profession requires a great deal of attention to detail. And typically, ISACA has asked one question from this topic previously too. Right? So always remember that we need to act with objectivity, due care, and due diligence. We need to serve in the interest of stakeholders in a lawful manner while maintaining high standards of conduct and character and not discrediting the profession or the association. It is important that we maintain the privacy and confidentiality of information that is obtained during the activities unless a disclosure is required by the legal authority. So whatever information we get of our client, whatever data he shares with us, we should not share it to anyone else. The only exception ISACA gives is when it is a statutory requirement or requirement by law. We need to maintain competency in our respective fields and agree to undertake only those activities that we can do. It is important that we inform appropriate parties of the results of the work performed, including disclosures of all significant facts. This is one of the most important things. There's a question that was asked on this only. And as an auditor, I have seen this is one of the most important things. See, so as an auditor, you have to disclose all significant facts in your report. You should not hide anything. Nothing you have to hide. So if you come across certain irregularity, if you come across anything that is significant, always remember the code of ethics talk about disclosure of significant facts, not any fact, significant facts. Because obviously we need to prepare our report in such a way that it should not be too detailed, it should not be too long, it should be just perfect, because it should present the information in the most meaningful way and the concise manner. Nobody wants to read 50 or 100 pages of a report, right? So you need to disclose all significant facts in the most meaningful and concise manner. And also, if you do not disclose any information, then that may distort the reporting of the results. It is important that you support that we support the professional education of stakeholders in enhancing their understanding of governance, management of systems, technology, including control and risk management. Sometimes we as CISA professionals or CISM professionals, we also step in the capacity of a consultant. when we are engaged as consultants. Okay, so in that capacity, this point is drafted wherein it is said that if you are engaged as a consultant or an expert, then it is your moral obligation to educate the stakeholders around you, to educate your auditee, your process owners about the best practices, about the frameworks, the risk management, control, and quality. Then we have something called ITAF, IT Assurance Framework. Now, what is IT Assurance Framework? Let's see. So, IT Assurance Framework, see, until now we talked about that we have certain standards which are given by ISACA, right? Now, how would you implement those standards? So, if the standard says that, if the standard says that, the auditor should act objectively, or you should select the sample for your audit in this particular fashion. Now, how would you actually do that? That is what IT assurance framework teaches us. So IT assurance framework, it is a documentation again. It gives you advice for implementing the standards effectively. See, literature is one thing. ISACA has given us standards on auditing. AICPA has given us standards on auditing. But how we actually implement those standards in our working, that is where our effectiveness gets judged as an auditor, and accordingly the quality of our output too. So IT assurance framework gives you advice along with support and examples as to how you have to implement the standards for a quality output, right? So what is the role? Obviously, this particular ITAF, IT assurance framework, gives you an entire framework for planning, executing, and reporting the results. How an audit report should look like, how you have to draft your opinion, how you have to create a statement of applicability, how you have to create your working papers. Everything is mentioned in ITAF. So, a practical guidance for auditors, right? So ITAF given by ISACA has given you certain resources such as certain templates, certain Excel files, which you can use to facilitate your audit process and improve the efficiency. Now, obviously, it is important to ensure adherence to the ITAF because that ensures that auditors maintain ethics, independence, and objectivity while conducting audits, ultimately supporting the company's integrity and accountability. Now, there are certain standards and there are certain guidelines associated to it. Let's see. So whenever I'm talking about standards, standards are certain mandatory requirement that auditors should follow. So standards give you basic information about, how the thing should look like. Like, for example, ISACA standard 1001 talks about how audit charter, what all considerations should be kept in mind while creating an audit charter, what information should audit charter have, what it should not have, what should be the review frequency, how will you do the risk assessment, and all the likes, right? In standard 1201 talks on engagement planning, that how you as an auditor should, what considerations you should keep in mind while planning an engagement. See, standards typically talk about the considerations that you should keep in mind while doing a certain specific activity, like reporting, what considerations you should keep in mind, in which situation you should issue a qualified opinion, in which situation you should issue an adverse opinion, right? Standard, then you have other standards. When I'm talking about guidelines, guidelines gives you assistance as to how you have to implement the standard or how that standard should be implemented. For example, if uh, standard 1201 talks about engagement planning, it talks about the considerations that should be there in mind when planning an engagement. However, guideline number 2201 that deals with engagement planning actually talks about the details of it, right? What all information should be there in engagement letter, where, what, whether it should be signed or not, where, when it should be executed, right? So auditing guidelines complement the auditing standards, and together they form your ITAF, right? IT assurance framework. Now, IT standards and guidelines, this is just a summary that you, if you keep in mind, I think you would be good for examination. Standards are mandatory requirements that must be followed. Guidelines are provide you assistance and tools and techniques. How the tools and techniques which are given by your ITAF, that gives you examples as to how auditor can implement the standards by giving you certain templates, certain more literature as to how audit opinion looks like, certain Excel templates and the likes. Right. So always remember, this is one past examination question. Always remember, standards are mandatory in nature while guidelines are discretionary in nature. ISACA has asked this question multiple times. Standards are mandatory in nature that you have to follow. Guidelines are discretionary in nature because guidelines just complement the standards. But guidelines don't say that you have to do it in this way only. No, follow the standards. If you want to do something other than what is mentioned in the guideline, you are free to do, but the ultimate compliance of the standard should be established. So while standards are mandatory, guidelines are recommendatory in nature, not discretionary, sorry, recommendatory in nature. Then you have security standards and framework. So these are four important security standards and framework that we should have a basic understanding of. First one is a Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So Sarbanes-Oxley Act, as I just showed you at the start of the session, mainly it talks about financial reporting, but the underlying thought of Sarbanes-Oxley Act was extended to IT reporting as well in today's time. Then you have HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, wherein we talk about that whatever medical records and patient information we have, okay, that should remain secure. Specifically, this is applicable in medical industry and hospital industry. Then you have PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, which basically talks about security of card holder data when you are making online payments. Your credit card, debit card, all that is covered here. Then the most basic and most general, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which specifically talks about privacy of personal data for European Union citizens, emphasizing data protection and individual rights. You don't have to remember more than this on these regulations. You don't have to go into the details of it. Then you have a standard which is also called ISO 27001. The latest version is 2022 version of it. So as part of this standard, you have 93 controls that they have given, in contrasting to earlier standard where you have had more than 100 controls. So ISO 27001 2022 talks where the Annex A talks about certain 93 controls, which gives you a certain baseline standard for implementing and maintaining information security controls and processes. Okay. And ISO 27001 has given you a terminology called ISMS. ISMS stands for Information Security Management System. Basically, the entire IT system in the particular company. Collectively, it is called ISMS, which includes all your IT processes, your technology, all information assets, people, all security considerations and the likes. So the entire ITIS framework is referred to as ISMS, Information Security Management System in any particular company. Then the role of ISO 27001 is to make sure that your ISMS complies with certain basic standards relating to, information security, relating to technology security, cyber security. They have given certain specific controls around it. Then you have compliance focus. Obviously, ISO 27001 also emphasizes the compliance to certain industry accepted standards like PCI DSS, taking an example of it. Then you have something called NIST. So NIST, specifically SP 800-53, is one particular standard that I would like to draw your attention to. This is not specifically mentioned in your CRM, but I believed that you should have a basic understanding of it. So basically what happens is that NIST SP 800-53 is again, a standard, is again, it is giving you a framework for selecting and specifying controls for information systems. So ISO 27001 is giving you a very basic and baseline and general controls. But NIST SP 800-53, this particular framework, it is first of all exclusive to certain sectors like Department of Defense or military in any particular country. But this standard is widely accepted in other industries as well, given the fact it is more specific and more robust, right? So the purpose of this particular framework is to enhance the security posture of an organization by providing a comprehensive set of controls. So the controls that they have given as per this framework are much more comprehensive than ISO 27001. But given the fact that ISO 27001 is more general in nature, it is more widely accepted in the industry as compared to NIST SP 800-53. Then this particular standard serves as a foundational element for building robust cybersecurity capabilities, and it is primarily used by federal agencies. See, why? See, if you just take a minute, see, federal agencies, obviously, the importance of data privacy, no one can understand it better than federal and government agencies, specifically agencies that are involved in investigation or that have highly sensitive and confidential data, such as Department of Defense, right? So NIST SP 800-53 has given us with the best practices, with the best set of controls that these highly regulated sectors should follow, and that is very comprehensive. So that is the reason most of the private sector companies, specifically the big ones, are also drawing inspiration from this standard, in addition to ISO 27001. And obviously, this standard is not mandatory except for Department of Defense and defense contractors, but it is widely accepted in the industry. From exam perspective, you don't need to learn the controls that are given in these two standards. You should just be aware that what these standards and framework talks about. Because I remember, I think 6 months back, in one of the attempts or in one of the CISA examination, ISACA gave this particular standard as an option to one of the question. So it is important that we should just know the concept. We don't have to read the entire controls for examination. Now, conducting an audit. Obviously, when you are actually conducting an audit, you have defined the scope. Always remember, whenever you are defining the scope, there you should have done so in consultation and discussion with the auditee, right? So that there are no disconnects later on, and you request necessary documentation. Once scoping is done, you collect the data. Then obviously, once you have the data, you evaluate the controls. So as I told you, every process has certain risks in it. Now, once we have identified those risks, sometimes client also gives us certain risks in the form of a risk control matrix, which is a formal documentation prepared by the client, by the auditee, having information on all the risks and controls in the process. Those risks and whatever additional risks we feel as an auditor are there in the process, we evaluate those controls that are there against those risks, by using the data that is there. Then the detailed steps in each process. So what you do is that, obviously, the scoping is a terminology wherein you are defining the audit scope. You define what data gathering technique you would use. Now, there are multiple types of data gathering techniques. I would take a moment to answer that for you. There are multiple types of data gathering technique. Like, how will you collect the data? Sometimes auditees give you direct access to their applications. That is one of the ways. Sometimes auditees don't give you an application access, but they give you the logs. They export the data from the application and then they give it to you, right? Sometimes you have to request external parties for some data. Like, for example, I have seen many companies who have outsourced their data centers to third-party vendors. So in that case, you have to request that third party to give you the data. So as part of the scope, you define how you will gather the data. And obviously, you discuss the audit scope and you plan with auditee. You request documentation, diagrams, process documentation, and policies. You gather the data, you select the sample. Always remember, you cannot check the entire data because it is too big. You have to use your professional judgment in selecting sample. In tomorrow's session, we'll study about sampling in very great lengths and details. What is sampling? What are the different techniques and how you can sample? Next, evaluating controls. You should evaluate controls to verify the effectiveness and efficiency. You collect evidences and document findings with observations. Then audit report and follow-up. Draft report should be prepared and discussed with executive management. Herein, I mean the process owners. Always remember the line managers, the head of departments, and the likes. So first you prepare a draft report, you discuss with them, you issue a final report with recommendations, management comments, and a follow-up should be done to ensure the findings are closed. Now, these are certain important findings as per your CRM that you as an auditor should take care of. Audit findings should be reported even if it was resolved during the audit. And I'll tell you, this has happened with me at least twice. I'll tell you what was happening was, I was doing an IT audit for one of the leading fintech payments bank. I came across that there were certain employees who have left the company, but the system access on those employee IDs was still active. So I flagged it out, and what they did, the next day, they revoked the system access of those IDs which I have flagged the previous day. So always remember, as an IS auditor, one important thing you should remember is your finding can be resolved and your evidence can be erased in a very short span of time. So you need to be very cautious and careful. Always keep screenshots, always keep logs and evidences of everything. So first point is just states that even if the finding was resolved during the audit, you have to report it. So even in my case, even though they corrected the particular finding that they revoked the system access of the people who have left, but still I reported that. Then the auditee fixation can be mentioned in side notes, indicating that auditee handled this finding. Sampling is important because auditor will not have the time and resources to test all the records. Evidences should be collected during the testing process. Consider the reliability of evidence. Now, I'll take a moment to have a discussion on this. When I am teaching ISO 27001, I teach this in very great detail. See, whenever we are talking of evidence, reliability is most important. Now, how will you establish reliability? This has nothing to do with your examination, but I'm just telling you, from a practical perspective as to how you do. See, always remember, evidence that you have obtained from external third parties is much more reliable than evidence generated internally. I hope we all agree on this. Second, always remember that it is important that you establish the chain of custody of evidence. So what do I mean by that? Suppose you have asked for certain logs or certain records. Now you have to also understand who is giving you the evidence and through how many people that particular evidence is flowing. Like, for example, if I asked for logs of database, now a database administrator is generating those logs, then maybe those logs are getting forwarded to some other person, then some other person is forwarding that information to me. Basically, who all handled that evidence during the entire process? That is what is important for you to understand, because if there are multiple people who are handling an evidence, then the integrity and reliability of evidence becomes questionable. Right? So whenever you ask for evidence, in order to check reliability, always understand how many people are handling that evidence. If you are asking for an Excel file, but already 10 people are working on that Excel file, in my opinion, that evidence is not at all reliable. So in that situation, sometimes you have to go for alternate evidence when you know that the evidence you can get is not reliable or it cannot be considered reliable. Okay, so understand two main things. First of all, whether it is internally generated or externally. Second, the chain of custody of the evidence. These two things are most important. Obviously, secure transfer portal is best way to receive evidence, where face-to-face meetings is best way to deliver an audit report. This is one of the ways which makes sure that the data you get is untampered. In case of a suspicious activity, auditor should communicate it to the audit management to do further investigation. In case of a major fraud, audit committee should be reported. Always remember, external auditor can access audit committee, the chairman of audit committee at any time, during the audit, after the audit, throughout the audit, even before the audit starts. But obviously, the engagement letter must be signed. Now, let's talk about testing and auditing. So whenever we are talking from a testing perspective, you know what testing is, right? You are testing the controls or the data that you have. So first you have something called compliance testing. Okay. Now what happens is that, see, I'll just give you an example from a process, just a perspective from a process perspective. See what happens. Suppose I am doing audit of the, I would say, network department in any particular company. Now, when I went there to do an audit of network department, I asked from them policies. I asked from them documentation, such as standard operating procedures, manuals. Then I also asked from them risk control matrix, RCM or RCSA as we call. So RCM, I'm telling again, it is a documentation prepared by the process owners, wherein they themselves identify certain risk in the process and what controls they have in that process. They themselves identify that. Kind of a controlled self-assessment. When I have all this documentation with me, what I do is that I look at the risk control matrix. The risk control matrix already has, for example, 50 odd risks identified and controls in order to counter those risks that are already there in the company, right? What I would do is that I would read the risk, I would read the controls, and basis on certain, I would read the risk, I would read the control. What I would do, I would first try to create an impression whether the risk that they have identified, whether the control that they are mentioning, whether it is fully covering the risk or not, whether it is fully tackling the risk or not. Second, what I would do, I would read the policies and I would make sure that whatever process they are following, it is in compliance with the policy or not, right? I would take into consideration whatever system settings they have, whether they are in compliance to the control that they have identified in the risk control matrix, or whether it is in line with the SOP or the policy that they have defined. I would just verify the process, the presence and effectiveness of controls that they have in that entire process. In compliance testing, I am not actually checking the data. What I'm doing, I am just making sure that the literature complies with the actual practice. I am not actually checking the data. I am making sure that if they are mentioning that there are 50 risks and these are controls, whether these controls actually exist or not. I would ask for system configuration, but I'm not going to deep dive or check the data actually. If they are saying that this, if policy is saying that access should be revoked in so and so manner, where the system is configured like that. Now, once I have done the compliance testing and I know my systems and process are in compliant with the documentation, the literature, then I would go to substantive checking. Now, what is substantive checking? Under substantive checking, I would actually check the actual data that is generated by those systems to make sure that whatever settings or configurations that they have done, which I already validated in compliance testing, I would make sure that those settings, configurations are actually getting reflected in the output that the system is generating. That is what substantive testing is, wherein I would in depth, in detail, check the data or the output of the that is getting generated at various levels in the system. I hope these two concepts are clear. Then let's talk about evidence. Okay. So what is evidence? We know that evidence serves as essential support for audit findings and conclusion. As an auditor, no one would believe a single word of yours unless you have evidence with you. Unless you have evidence with you. Okay. So, uh, just one second. So evidence serves as an essential support for audit findings and conclusions. Claims that are made by auditors must be substantiated by evidence. Then you have two types of evidence, direct and indirect evidence. Direct evidence, as the word itself suggests, it is unaltered testimony from eyewitnesses and written documentation considered the most reliable. Then you have indirect evidence. Now what happens is that I'll tell you, under indirect evidence, we rely on circumstantial evidence. Now, what do we mean by circumstantial evidence? Sometimes what happens is that a thing has not yet happened. Like, for example, fraud. I am working on a forensic audit. Somebody has engaged me stating that there is, a bank fraud in this particular company. Okay. Now I have to uh, unearth or investigate and figure out whether that bank fraud has actually happened or not. That is what forensic audit we do. Now what am I going to do? See, I don't know whether that fraud has actually happened or not. But in order to understand the mindset of the fraudster, I need to I need to create a hypothesis, right? I need to create a hypothetical scenario to figure out how the fraudster would act in different stages, and what evidence can I take considering the activities of the fraudster at different stages of the fraud. That is what indirect evidence is. What happens is that you are asking for an evidence which is called circumstantial evidence. That is, which is based on a circumstance that may or may not have happened. But in your understanding, if it would have happened, it would have happened in this manner. So in order to establish that hypothesis, you are asking for an evidence. That is what indirect evidence is. Typically, we do so when we are actually doing forensic audit. Then you have techniques for gathering evidence. First of all, you assess the policies and their approval status. You take interviews and observations. You take interviews, right? You ask the people, you talk to people. You, as an auditor, be vigilant, be very alert. You need to observe. You need to be aware of your surroundings and your things. Reperformance or simulation, you sometimes conduct simulation to validate the findings and understand the business process. Like, for example, in forensics, we do that. If we feel that if this activity would have been done, then this kind of evidence would have been generated, right? Then what we do is that we try to ask for a similar kind of evidence, and we try to understand how particular business process might have worked. So evidence reliability, obviously evidence obtained by third party is much more reliable. Evidence that is collected by auditor is much more reliable, and evidence collected directly from source is more reliable. Chain of custody thing that I was mentioning. Instead of asking someone to get you an evidence, maybe you can straight away ask them to generate a system report in front of you from that particular system. That would be more reliable. And reliability is determined by independence of the provider. A third party would be much more reliable. Qualification, who is providing the piece of information. Sometimes more qualified people can actually be harmful for us, because if I am straight away asking for an evidence from a person who knows forensics, who knows steganography, heuristics, and hacking and all the stuff, then definitely he is in a position to alter the evidence. So sometimes more qualified people are also not suitable to provide us evidence. Then objectivity of the evidence or judgment. Always remember that the evidence should be unbiased. Then the timing of evidence, very important. Specifically, as an IS auditor, you ask for logs or report. from systems, but logs or reports get generated on a real-time basis, on a daily basis. So if you asked for an evidence 2 months back and you are still working on it after 2 months, there is a very big chance that the evidence might have turned obsolete, because in that particular period from when you asked the evidence and you are standing now, in that particular period a lot of information might have changed, more new information might have flown into the system, right? So the timing of evidence is very important. Then how can we ensure security? Evidence should be kept in a secure place and handled securely to preserve the chain of custody, mainly if evidence could be used to support the claim of illegal activity. I hope this point is clear. We just understood what COC or chain of custody is. The chain of custody should be maintained, otherwise evidence will not be reliable, especially in forensics. The retention period is to be decided according to business requirements. I would tell you, 8 years is the standard minimum requirement in across India, European Union, UAE, and across all major markets. It is a standard requirement of 8 years to keep the information and keep the data, right? So we as auditors should be aware, and this is something we need to check too. Audit evidence should be shared securely, such as through SFTP. SFTP is Secure File Transfer Protocol. So under SFTP path, a secure encrypted path or channel is created, which the auditor can use to access the information, or using digital rights management solutions, etc. How do you evaluate the controls? So this is the last slide that we are taking today. Post this, let's have a discussion on the certain important issue, the things that you want to discuss. So evaluation of controls. So what are controls? So far in today's session, I think I've talked a lot on controls, control this, control that, and all that stuff. What are controls? Controls are safeguards to prevent incidents, detect problems, or correct them. What are controls? If we have certain risk in a process, we have identified certain irregularities in a process, then these controls, they are measures or safeguards to make sure that risk does not materialize. So if I say there is a risk of unauthorized payment to suppliers, then the control can be that there is a maker checker or segregation of duties, that one person is creating invoice while other person is paying that invoice, just to make sure not one person has end-to-end control over the process. Auditors can use third-party resources to assess the strength, weakness of the control, and determining if they meet the control objectives. The use of such resources should be communicated to the customer. So obviously, sometimes what happens is that auditor can use third-party resources. Now, these third-party resources can mean certain applications, certain auditing tools, that we as auditors use when we are doing the audit. So it is important that whatever applications we are using, we need to disclose the same to the client. Auditor can explain to the auditee how evaluation is being performed. And you actually have to do this. You have to do this thing. So as part of your working papers, you need to maintain detailed test steps as to how you check that information. The auditor should first identify the potential risk and assess the controls in place. The auditor should consider compensating control before reporting any weakness. What is a compensating control? I would just take 1 minute to explain, because we are going to talk on this tomorrow in very great detail. Compensating controls are basically those controls which compensate for absence of one particular control. So like for example, if somebody is talking about, if somebody is talking about the risk that access rights are not revoked, then you have the primary control which states that as and when employee leaves, access rights are revoked on the same day. But you might also have a compensating control which states that in order to ensure that access rights are revoked, we also undertake a monthly review of the access right. So that review, your primary control was removal of access right once employee leaves. Your compensating control is review of access rights. This makes sure that if one particular control fails, there is another control to compensate for the security that is intended by the primary control. We learn on this tomorrow in very great length. The auditor should keep materiality in mind to know what could be considered a significant weakness to different levels of management, which is based on sound judgment of auditor. What is materiality? Materiality is nothing but a certain specific level beyond which, if something goes, that would raise an alert, or that would be a red flag. For example, if out of 100 instances the auditor found out that, okay, one instance of access right non-revocation is something which is fine, but if out of 100 there were 20 instances wherein access rights were not revoked, then that becomes material for the auditor and he needs to disclose it. So materiality is something that we as auditors keep in mind, which serves as a threshold for us, right? Which serves as a certain specific threshold to us. And that determines, whether there is any major weakness in the system or not, right? The auditor should be aware that a small error may become material when combined with other errors. So again, materiality is nothing, as I would say, that a certain specific threshold that auditors have in mind, which gives us an indication of the level of weakness that we have to report or not. So if out of every 100 or 1000 instances, only one is error, it is fine. But what if 20, 30, 50 instances are erroneous? That becomes reportable for us, right? That becomes a high risk observation for us. So that is something that, so as an auditor, we need to keep this in mind. What is material at what level of management? If I talk of executive management or line management, maybe smaller issues be material for them. But for top level executives like the chief technical officer, the board of directors, audit committee, these small petty issues may not be, these small petty issues may not be material or relevant for them, or be a weakness for them. They are more concerned with risk. They are more concerned with what could impact data security, business from that perspective. So it is important for us to figure out what is material for different level of people. Materiality is a thing that is material for lower level of people like line managers may not be material for executive management, for senior management. And obviously, small errors can become material when combined with other errors as well. So, okay, how far are we? Let me see if cool. So we are far with my target. So I thought that we should cover at least until slide 48, 49. We are through that. So I think let's take 5 minutes and solve a couple of questions. So we are in a position to, wrap up our understanding for the day. Question number, so I would request all the participants to unmute themselves to participate in the questioning and answering session and debate with me as much as you want as to why that answer is correct or not. So you can see question number 1. What is the primary purpose of IS audit? What do we feel is the correct answer out of the 4? What do we feel is the correct answer to this question?
It should be 3, provide assurance on controls.
Okay, option number 3. Please kindly unmute yourselves because I cannot see chat box because I'm presenting my screen. So unmute yourself and say your answers. Option number 3, 1. Okay, somebody said option 3. Any other guesses?
To ensure data security, integrity.
To ensure data integrity. Okay, somebody has also mentioned option number 2. Any other guesses?
Yeah,
Devash,
option
I
number
also
3.
think number 3. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Option 1, 2, 3.
No one is saying option 2. Okay, so option number 3 is the correct answer to this, to provide assurance on controls, because obviously now, okay, so before we go ahead, I would like to give you an understanding as to how you guys have to approach questions in examinations. I'll tell you. My mic got turned off again. Just give me 1 second. Let me turn on my camera.
I think Devash, the key word there is primary, right? Because I think the data integrity is actually part of maintaining number provide assurance, right? So data integrity is also a good answer, but I think it's the main thing is what is the primary purpose?
Definitely, sir. You have said the the actual nucleus of my statement. So see, whenever you are solving any question, you have to keep certain things in mind. First of all, read the question, figure out the keyword as sir rightly suggested, primary. Because ISACA has one very dirty habit of playing with words. They will use words like primary purpose, most important, least important, major weakness, major strength. They would use words like these. So first, figure out what is the nucleus or the keyword in the question. In this primary purpose, all other points are purpose of IS audit. I totally agree, but they are not the primary one. So primary is your keyword. Second, when you are solving questions, always try to eliminate incorrect options. Then try to figure out the correct one. Because in that situation, you would be in a very comfortable zone that I know why other options are incorrect. So if option number 3 is correct one, then you should have a reasoning in your mind why 1, 2, and 4 are incorrect. As sir rightly suggested, all 1, 2, and 4 are purposes of IS audit, but they are not the primary purpose. That is the reason third is correct, right? So always follow these two things. Try to don't like what I always say, don't directly look for correct answer. Try to eliminate the incorrect options first, then arrive at the correct answer. Then whatever answer you will select will 100% be correct. So yes, option number 3 is correct. Let's talk about question 2. What is the key responsibility of an IS auditor? What do we feel?
So it will be again 3, evaluating logical security controls.
Okay, evaluating logical security controls is one of the inputs we got. Any other inputs?
It is
Ensuring compliance.
Ensuring compliance with law and
ensuring
regulation.
compliance with laws and regulation.
Okay, so I'll tell you specifically for this particular question, both the options 2 and 3 are very close. That is, ensuring compliance with laws and regulations, evaluating logical security controls. Definitely both the options are correct, but option number 3 is more, correct, because see, right now, if I talk from specifically from the perspective of an IS auditor, we need to also take into consideration that we are not just talking from an auditor perspective, but specifically we are talking from an IS audit perspective. And option number 3 is close because we are evaluating logical security controls. Now, logical security controls takes into consideration your role as an IS auditor, specifically what we studied so far, right? Taking into consideration all aspects like access management, taking into consideration all aspects like, cryptography, encryption, and all the likes. So 2 and 3 are very close, but 3 is more appropriate from an IS audit perspective. Always remember, we have to focus on the keywords that are there in the question, and our keyword is not just auditor. If it was auditor, definitely 2 would be correct answer, but we are talking from an IS audit perspective. So definitely our answers should have that dimension as well.
Yeah. But I will also say that, see, even if it is an auditor, see, auditor evaluates compliance with law, not ensure compliance with law, because ensuring compliance
Definitely.
is management's responsibility.
Definitely. That's a very amazing input, sir added. Ensuring compliance is not an auditor's role. Auditor's role is evaluating whether the compliance is done or not. That's a very amazing input, sir. And obviously, 1 and 4 is not the job of the auditor. So are we good to move ahead, or we need some more discussion on this? See, ISACA has the habit of tricking us like this. And it is not a one-day job. This thing will mature by the time we'll end the batch. So by the time we'll end the batch, we would have solved at least 100 questions. That's my word to you. So definitely this all nitty-gritty thing that will be in your blood by the time we end the batch. So definitely I hope that answers your question. So let's talk about this. What is the primary advantage of a main advantage of a risk-based auditing? What do we feel?
Answer 3. Focus on areas with the greatest risk.
Okay, somebody has said option number 3. Do we have any other guesses apart from option 3, or do we need to debate why other options are less relevant, or anyone feels other option is more much better answer? Cool. So option number 3 is the correct answer, wherein we are focusing on areas with greatest risk, because we studied risk-based auditing, doing a risk assessment, prioritizing it. Now, which standard is primarily used by IS auditors for guidance? What do we feel? What do we feel is the correct answer for this? Any guesses for question 4?
ISACA auditing standards.
Okay, somebody has said option 3rd. Any other guesses? 1, 2, 4. Before we dissect the question, let's dissect the question. Okay.
Is
See.
it number 2 by any chance? Sorry.
Option 3 is correct answer, because I purposefully added ISO 27001. I'll tell you why. See, ISO 9001 is a quality standard. ISO 27001 is your IT standard. COBIT is your framework for internal audit. Now, obviously, first of all, always remember, question is talking about standard. Okay. COBIT is a framework, not a standard. So option number 4 is not your answer. COBIT is a framework, not a standard. So that is the reason COBIT is not your answer. Second, we are talking the standard used by auditors. Who is using the standard? Auditor. ISO 27001 is typically, yes, it's for IT, but companies use it. Companies use ISO 27001 to make sure that their security practices are in line with the best practices, right? That is the reason 2 is also not the answer, because auditor is not the user of ISO 27001. The company is the user of that standard, or typically company. Then, and it states that IS auditors for guidance, and we just studied the ITAF framework. It has standards along with guidance, right? Giving you the entire picture of how you have to do. So ISACA's IA auditing standards is helping you as an auditor in figuring out IS audit. I hope that answers your question. Do we have any doubt in question 4? Do we have any doubt in question 4?
No.
No. Always remember, I purposefully added COBIT here because COBIT is a framework, not a standard, and ISACA tricks you like this in examination. So be very cautious of it. We haven't studied CATs. I think we would study it today. Okay, let's take question 6. What is the primary characteristic of an effective IS auditor? What do we feel? What do we feel?
3, ability to work independently.
3.
Okay. 3.
I said
Everyone
number
is saying
2. I would say number 2.
Number 2. 2 and 3 are very close options, and one of them is correct. Other 1 and 4 is definitely incorrect. So I think we agree that it's either 2 or either 3. Let's talk about strong community. So it's this. So see, 2 and 3 both are correct. However, let's go one by one and see which option is incorrect and for what reason. As an IS auditor, having technical expertise only is not sufficient for you, right? Whenever ISACA uses the word, any extreme word in option only, please read that option very carefully, because this is these are tricky options. If it states technical expertise only, it simply means that auditor should be technically sound. No matter his communication skills are rubbish, no matter his working style is good or bad, nobody cares. So obviously having technical expertise only is not sufficient. So this is straight away not happening. Programming language, straight away not happening, because as IS auditor, I know thousands of IS auditors who don't know how to code, but that doesn't hamper our work. So 4 is not the answer. Ability to work independently. Now see why this thing is not the answer. I'll tell you. See, obviously it is important that you should work, you should know how to work independently. You should not know how to work independently. But again, as an IS auditor, you know that, right? I mean, we need a team with us. We need resources. We need people. We need to have a sound level of communication across with different stakeholders, with different people, with our team, with the auditee. We also need certain specific team with us. Sometimes we are working on integrated audit assignments wherein we are working in conjunction with other auditors. Sometimes we are working under the supervision of regulators wherein we have to closely collaborate with regulators and work with them. So while option number 3 is definitely one of the characteristic of an effective IS auditor, it is not as primary as strong communication skills, because your job as an auditor is much more than ability to working independently. In fact, when you have to work with multiple people and stakeholders, that is where your effectiveness as an auditor gets judged. Because how you maintain coordination among multiple people, how you make sure that you are communicating things to them, how are you bringing them together, how are you extracting information from multiple stakeholders. So in that context, 3 is definitely a characteristic, but it is not a primary characteristic. So given the sensitivity and the dynamism of our profession, option number 2 is most appropriate. And also I'm telling you, this is a past examination question, actual examination question from the past exam question. Most of my questions are actual past exam questions, which my students tell me after they appear for exam. So yes, option number 2 is primary characteristic. Option number 3 is a characteristic, but not the primary. Okay, any inputs, any debate, any discussion we want to have here? Any discussion, or do we all agree with what I say? Feel free to counter, please. Feel free to debate. We can debate as long as you want, as much as you want.
Devansh, I agree, because I think communication is very important as an auditor, right? You have to communicate, I mean, up, down, sideways. I think if you're doing an audit and you're not communicating, you're not sharing your findings, you're not bringing risk, you're seeing the picture, everything is worthless at the end of the day.
Definitely, sir. So our effectiveness of our report is judged on the basis of how we communicate, right? Ultimately, what we present in our report, what we communicate to the stakeholders, that's how our effectiveness is judged. So definitely 2 take a step, above option number 3. Cool. So I think it's already 10-15 minutes past our scheduled time. Let's call it off for the day. If you see that there are multiple questions in this QB, this will also be shared with you. I think this is only for domain number 1. I've prepared QBs for all domains. This is for domain number 1. Take your time, go through it. If you have questions, feel free to ask, and we'll solve more questions tomorrow by trying to target at least 10 questions every day. So that was the session for the day. If you guys have any doubts, anything, any inputs, thank you, Kemi ma'am, for your appreciation. If you guys have any doubts, any inputs, any questions, feel free to discuss. Thank you, team, for joining me on a Friday. Yeah, Maitri ma'am, you have any question, please?
Thank you, sir, for the insightful session. I just having one doubt is that in one earlier question, it was relating to standard. So there, sir, you explained that ISACA IA standard is the more relevant answer rather than 27,001. So so what I understood that since 27,001 is an international standard from different body, is it the reason?
No, ma'am. Ma'am, okay. So, ma'am, when we are talking the question was, which standard is more relevant for IS auditor? So obviously there are multiple standards, but we need to see which one is more relevant for an auditor from an audit perspective. ISO 27001, ma'am, is an implementation standard. It is not an auditing standard. ISO 27001 is primarily meant for companies, not the auditors. So companies read that standard, understand what is the best implementation methodology, how should we implement things. So as an auditor, we need to refer those standards that are specific to our auditing as a profession, right? So that is the reason from an audit perspective, ISACA standards were more appropriate. But from an implementation perspective or from a consultant perspective, if I had to select, my answer would have been ISO 27001, because ISO is an implementation standard, not an auditing standard. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So in case we have any question, please feel free to let me know. Else we can wind up for the day and we'll meet same time, same date, or same time, same place tomorrow for more learnings.
One more thing, like I know we are already exceeded the time. Just
No,
a general question is, from the exam perspective. So, how many questions are there in the exam? What is the time duration? And each question has a similar weightage, or there are different weightages for the questions?
perfect, sir. So, okay, I'll tell you this thing once more. There are 150 questions. Exam is of 4 hours. You have two options. You can either take remote proctoring, wherein you can sit and take exam from the comfort of your home, which I never advise. Second is you can go to the testing centers and you can take the examination from there. Pearson is the official testing venue for ISACA examinations, and you can take the exam from there. How to answer your
Okay.
next
And
question?
yeah.
What is the
Yeah.
weightage? So exam is of total 800 marks, wherein out of 150 questions, those 150 questions that are asked, they are jumbled. Jumbled in the sense, question 1 can be from domain number 2, while question number 2 can be from domain number 5. So it is a mix and match of questions from multiple domains that you get in examination. Once you get your final result, there is, so how evaluation happens in any ISACA examination or any ISC square examination is that you don't have any question mark assigned to one specific question only, right? They have a scale of relative grading wherein they assess your performance across all the 5 domains, and then they assign a certain specific grade out of 800 to each domain. Now, after they have assigned out of 800 a score to each of the domain, then they give you a total cumulative score, which is again out of 800. So no specific marks is assigned to one particular question, because obviously there are 150 questions, there are 800 marks. You cannot arrive at a question to mark ratio in any case. So it is a relative grading that is done, keeping in mind how you performed across all the 5 sections. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the reason I always say to students, do not leave any domain. Prepare all the 5 domains, because you cannot just say that if you are leaving one domain, you can pass the examination basis on other 4. That is a very less chance of that happening. But we have to work and excel at all the 5. So any other question, or we can call it off. Okay, so yeah, anyone saying something, please feel free to ask. There is no time limitation. You can definitely ask anything. Okay, so I think we are good to go for today. And thank you, team, again for joining me. And we'll catch up tomorrow and have a fruitful session. Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good night.
ma'am. Good night. Good night,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Good night. Good night, ma'am. Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Take care.